Vincent was a famous hunter in the region with extensive experience, a muscular body and sharp senses. Vincent also had a beautiful wife named Alina, but unfortunately, the couple was infertile and could not have children. A few years ago, on a quiet night, Vincent kept hearing a faint crying sound, coming from the horse stable. At first, he thought it was some wild animal, but when he went there with an axe, Vincent was astonished to see a fair-skinned, blonde-haired baby wrapped in swaddling clothes, lying in the middle of the stable. A few years passed, and that child had grown up with blonde hair and blue eyes, exceptionally beautiful and adorable. The boy was named Chiron, our protagonist. Vincent and Olina always considered him their own precious son. Every day when he went to the forest, Vincent would bring his son along. While he chopped wood, Chiron would be engrossed in reading the magic books his father bought for him. Their family was so warm, but the children in the village didn't seem to like Chiron very much. The reason was rather silly. He was always focused on reading books. And moreover, he was very thin and looked as delicate as a girl, not at all like Vincent's tall and strong physique. The village gossips often whispered that Chiron was picked up by Vincent and Alina from some corner, and naturally the village children knew about it too. Although it was true that Chiron was adopted, Vincent couldn't accept people gossiping about the child he considered his treasure. Vincent always felt that it was his fault that Chiron was ostracized by the village children. Of course he couldn't just go and punch each of them. So to make up for his guilt, he could only frequently take his son to various places to broaden his horizons. The next morning, Vincent took his son to the city of Crayas, in the suburbs of the kingdom of Tamaya. This was Chiron's first time in a city, and the luxury and bustle of the place dazzled him. Vincent still had some business to attend to, so he stopped the carriage in front of a fruit stall owned by an acquaintance named Ma and told his son to stay put until he returned. Although Chiron was usually very obedient, this was his first time in the city, so Vincent repeatedly warned his son not to go into dark alleys or run into nobles. Before driving the carriage away, Chiron stayed at the fruit stall trying to prove his usefulness by writing a sign for Ma. The man seemed surprised that a country child like him knew how to write and also seemed very smart and clever. While Ma was admiring the beautiful child, Chiron suddenly asked him curiously, "Mr. Ma, do you know about magic? What the law?" "No magic." Chiron excitedly held up the large magic book Vincent had bought for him. Ma burst out laughing. Children were indeed children, always interested in grand things like dragons, heroes, and mages. But seeing the sparkling, expectant look in Chiron's eyes, Ma couldn't bear to disappoint him. So he pointed towards the alley in front of them. "I don't know much about magic, but over there are many books about it." Chiron followed the direction of Ma's finger, and his eyes immediately lit up. Behind the alley was a large bookstore. With Ma's permission, he immediately ran towards it. However, after entering the bookstore, Chiron was stopped by the haughty female owner. She forbade him from touching the books on the shelves, reasoning that these expensive books are not for poor wretches like you. Just then the bookstore welcomed a distinguished guest, whom the owner called the head butler, though it was unclear from which prestigious family. While the owner was busy attending to him, Chiron quickly flipped through a few books on the shelf and found that their contents were not very interesting. He listlessly left the store and happened to see a man carrying a box of books passing by. Chiron, being a book lover, recklessly followed him. What stunned him next was that the man bluntly dumped the entire box of books into a pile of trash. "So this is where Dad gets my books," Chiron thought, dazed for a few seconds. Then he approached the trash pile and carefully picked up each book to look at it. At that moment, some laughter reached Chiron's ears. He turned his head and saw two noble girls talking happily, each holding a book. Chiron wondered what was different between him and them. Why did his father warn him not to run into nobles before they left? And why were they allowed to freely read the books they liked, while he couldn't? Thinking of this, Chiron unconsciously followed the two girls. But before he could catch up, he was stopped by a tall guard. "Hey kid, this isn't a place for kids like you to be wandering around. Beyond this gate is an area reserved for nobles. Where are your parents?" My father is nearby," Chiron replied nervously. Just then, another guard approached. A single glance at Chiron made him suspicious, as he didn't look like the children who lived around here. They concluded that Chiron was either an orphan or an accomplice of thieves and robbers, so they wanted to drag him away for questioning. But quick as a flash, he slipped out of his outer coat and escaped. Chiron hid behind some bushes, his hair disheveled, and his clothes dirty, but he still felt lucky that he hadn't been caught. Just as he was about to pick up his shoes and return to Mr. Ma's place, Chiron heard a voice from behind a large wall. "All right, now we will discuss the topic, what is magic?" "No, Headmaster, show us some fire breathing," a few people replied with great enthusiasm. Chiron looked up at the wall, which was 2 or 3 times his height, and of course, he couldn't see anything. Wait, could this be a magic academy? The excitement in his heart surged. Chiron pressed his ear against the wall and listened intently. Inside, the person called the headmaster was continuing to ask his students questions. He asked what the most important thing in learning magic was. Someone said it was knowledge. Another said it was diligence. And yet another thought the most important thing was money, but no one had answered correctly yet. Chiron tried to listen carefully and finally got the headmaster's answer. The most important thing in learning magic is insight. The noble children inside, who were about his age, all looked dumbfounded when he mentioned insight. "What is that?" The headmaster didn't answer immediately, but instead asked, "Is there anyone here who doesn't know what 1 + 1 is? Who doesn't know that?" "It's 2, of course," the students clamored. "Then can anyone explain why it equals 2? The headmaster asked again. The students looked at each other, and none could answer. That strange feeling you have right now is insight. There was a time when people didn't know that 1 + 1 had 2, and many scholars had to work hard just to prove it. But even without solid proof, we still understand that 1 + 1 had 2, right? That's because it's a law that has always existed in the world. That's also why we don't need to learn it. We automatically understand and accept it. And magic is the same. It has been present in this world from the very beginning. We can feel and accept it with our insight. That's why it's more important than knowledge and diligence, the headmaster explained at length. The children in the academy still hadn't fully digested what he said, but Chiron, eavesdropping from the outside, felt his heart pounding. The most important thing in learning magic wasn't money or noble status, but insight. So a child like him could also become a great mage, right? At this thought, Chiron was both excited and nervous, and his heart nearly leaped out of his chest when he heard the headmaster's voice ask, "Child behind the wall, I want to hear your thoughts." Chiron jumped, startled. He didn't think he could be discovered through such a thick wall. Should he run away or answer the question, especially in his current dirty, disheveled state? Chiron was afraid that the headmaster and the children inside would be like the bookstore owner, or the 2 guards looking down on him for being poor and dirty. But he was also afraid that if he missed this opportunity, he would regret it for the rest of his life. And so, with some tremendous motivation, Chiron used his small body to climb up the wall, step by step. His appearance was indeed very messy, but his eyes were shining brightly. Chiron saw the headmaster of the Magic Academy sitting under a tree with a few children. His demeanor was very gentle, not at all like the bookstore owner or the guards. As soon as he saw Chiron, he spoke first. "Hello, child. Did you come to play with me? That noble headmaster named Alfus was a 4th-level mage and also the founder of the Alfus Magic Academy." Chiron used all his strength to jump down from the wall, then walked step by step towards them. The children sitting around Alfus were all from noble families, clean and well-dressed, a stark contrast to Chiron. Some of them, upon seeing his appearance, knew he was just a commoner and bluntly told him to go away. But Headmaster Alfus was not like that. "It's all right, come here. Did something this old man just said attract you?" The gentle demeanor of Headmaster Alfus made Chiron much less self-conscious. Although still quite timid, he dared to say what he wanted. I want to see magic. I've only seen it in books, never with my own eyes." Before Alfus could reply, the students surrounding him started clamoring. They called Chiron a liar, asking how a commoner could possibly read. He knew he had no voice here, so he bowed his head very low. "Please, sir, any spell will do. I just want to witness magic with my own eyes." Alfus burst out laughing. "Ha ha, it's simple. I'll show you all a spell that can create wind." As soon as Alfus finished speaking, a strong wind blew, lifting Chiron into the air. Not just him, the children surrounding the headmaster were also blown into the sky, but they all seemed to be enjoying it. Only Chiron was both scared and confused. After reaching a certain height, he and the other children began to fall. While they still seemed excited, Chiron's heart felt like it was about to drop out of fear. This was the first time he had ever been in a free fall, and from such a terrifying height, Chiron felt like he was about to be shattered. He was so scared that he squeezed his eyes shut until, a long time later, he no longer heard the whistling of the wind, only the giggling of the children. Only then did he dare to open his eyes and see that he was floating just about a meter above the ground. The magic students were teasing him for being too timid. Headmaster Alfus, seeing this, couldn't help but let out a hearty laugh. "How was that? That's magic." Chiron landed safely, but his heart was still pounding with fear. So this was what magic was like. It was so sublime, far beyond the understanding that the book had provided him. What exactly is magic, Headmaster? Chiron still hadn't overcome the psychological shock. Alfus stroked his long beard, seemingly looking for an easy-to-understand example to explain to him. But Chiron, too impatient, urged him, "Please tell me the truth." His voice was quite loud, and to an outsider, it would sound like Chiron was being rude to the headmaster. The noble students were very surprised because no one had ever dared to speak so loudly to Alfus before, not even the teachers at the school. They were sure Alfus would fly into a rage and punish Chiron. But when he saw the boy's intelligent face and bright eyes, Alfus couldn't get angry. "Haha. If you want to know that badly, I'll explain. It's a bit complicated, you know." He stroked his beard while explaining to Chiron what true magic was. It was something beyond common sense. In other words, it was an expansion of the mind to discover the truth of the world. It's something unrealistic, but maybe because of that, it's closer to the truth, Chiron suddenly asked. Alfus couldn't hide the excitement on his face because what Chiron had just said was something that even the noble students here couldn't figure out on their own. "Did you read this in a book?" "No, sir. But I've seen similarities in many books. Many great ideas were once considered absurd and avoided, but in the end, they had to be accepted as newly discovered truths. So the truth is actually hidden within those absurdities." "That's what I thought." Alfus nodded continuously as he listened to him speak. It seemed he was very pleased with this bright, intelligent child. Despite his difficult circumstances, he still tried to absorb and filter the little information he had to understand the issue thoroughly. It was just a pity that he was only a commoner. His resources, after all, could not compare to these noble children. To help Chiron understand more about magic, Alfus called over a pink-haired girl named Suman and asked her to enter the spiritual world. Then he took out a handful of coins from his pocket and asked Suman to guess how many coins he was holding. Suman, almost without thinking, directly answered with the number 6. And surprisingly, this answer was completely correct. Chiron was extremely amazed, with 100,000 why questions popping up in his head. Alfus guessed he would have such thoughts, so he explained right away that when a mage concentrates, their mind becomes sharp enough to sense everything around them. Even more outstanding mages can count the number of leaves on a tree from a great distance. This is called a state of extreme mental sensitivity, or the spiritual world. While explaining, Alfus continued to change the number of coins in his hand. And this time, Suman still guessed correctly. A mage who can enter the spiritual world perceives the outside world with a supernatural ability. And eventually it can even dominate reality. Not just stopping at small things like counting coins, but also having the ability to sense the entire situation happening right in front of them. This was also the basic thing Alfus wanted Chiron to be able to do if he wanted to become a mage, because not everyone can enter this state of the spiritual world. First, you need to sense yourself. Try practicing in a quiet place. Then you must shatter the wandering thoughts in your mind. When you can do that, a new world will be enlightened for you to explore. Do you understand what I mean? "So if I can't sense myself, I won't be able to empty my thoughts?" Chiron asked again. Alfus was repeatedly surprised by Chiron's questions. He asked him to try sensing himself right here because, after all, if Chiron couldn't do it, he would have no fate with learning magic. But what exactly is the self? Chiron was beginning to find the answer to that question. While the brain is just an organ, the senses and reality he perceived could not exceed the concept of the brain. Chiron wasn't trying to understand its meaning, but to feel it, just like that. After quite a while, Chiron opened his eyes. In front of him were still Headmaster Alfus and the students, but something seemed different. Alfus asked with an expectant gaze, "What did you feel?" Chiron's whole body was drenched in sweat. He answered sound. "I heard all the sounds." The children burst out laughing. Of course you had to hear sounds. Alfus didn't show his attitude, but he seemed quite disappointed. He thought Chiron couldn't do it, just as he had initially predicted. because what happens inside the spiritual world is in a different dimension of space. There one perceives events with entirely different senses, like synesthesia, a neurological syndrome where the brain processes data with multiple senses at once. At that point, you could smell sounds, taste light, and feel the scenery through your skin. But Chiron had just said he heard sound, which proved he hadn't entered the spiritual world at all. Anyway, this wasn't something everyone could do. Alfus slowly stood up, patting Chiron's head comfortingly. Well done. If you continue to practice in the future, you might be able to hear more sounds. Then, Alfus turned to his students. All right, the special class is over. Let's go back to the academy. After leaving, Alfus couldn't stop feeling regretful, because finding a child as intelligent as Chiron was not easy. He just felt that if he had been born into a noble family and taught from a young age, what he could achieve would far surpass these children. As for Chiron, he also climbed over the wall and returned outside. However, Chiron's mood was in turmoil, because he knew that he had entered the spiritual world just now. Chiron only told Alfus that he heard sound, but he didn't say everything that came after. That after that shocking sound, he felt as if his very self had been torn into hundreds of images and scattered across the world. He felt he was no longer a small entity, but that he was the entire world. That feeling made Chiron's tears flow uncontrollably. He couldn't help but tremble before the vastness of this world. It was just a small moment, but Chiron had truly escaped his own body and become indefinite merging with the world. He ran headlong as if to vent the feeling in his heart. And because of that emotional turmoil, Chiron accidentally bumped straight into a passerby. Only he fell backward as the other person was quite tall. Chiron frantically apologized, but the other person didn't seem to intend to let him go. There were a few more of them with him, and the one he bumped into immediately grabbed him by the collar. "Are you crazy? You bump into someone, you have to pay." "Right, I'm sorry. Chiron was so panicked, he stuttered. "Sorry isn't enough. Are you from the Wolf Guild? Did you come to take my life?" Chiron didn't understand what Wolf Guild the other person was talking about, but if this continued at best, he'd get a beating, and at worst, he'd lose his life. While in a panic, he heard a female voice ring out. "What are you guys doing? Is something interesting happening?" "Lady Amy, why are you here? Are you bored again?" The thug quickly turned his head to greet the newcomer, but his hand still didn't let go of Chiron's collar. The person called Lady Amy was a young noblewoman with striking red hair. Chiron wanted to ask for help, but when he saw the other person was a noble, he immediately gave up the idea. As for the thugs, after greeting Amy, they returned to the main issue. First, Chiron took a knee to the gut. He immediately collapsed to the ground, his whole body trembling with pain. Bullying a small child like Chiron not only didn't make these guys feel ashamed, but instead excited them. The whole gang started to continuously use crude words to provoke Chiron, even asking about his parents with not-so-nice words. Hearing them talk about his parents like that, Chiron's eyes immediately changed from fearful to full of resentment. The opponent also realized he was angry, but Chiron had no chance to retaliate, because right after that he was kicked straight in the head. The whole group of big guys ganged up on a single child. Chiron couldn't resist. He could only cover his head and endure. After a while, Amy couldn't stand it anymore and stepped closer. "Stop it, he'll really die like this." Then she squatted down next to Chiron and asked, "Are you okay?" "I didn't do anything, I was just passing by." Chiron seemed to sense a glimmer of hope from this girl, and explained while crying. "Yeah, stop it already," Amy said. "Isn't there a more fun game?" Just when he thought he would be saved, it turned out this girl with an angelic appearance was actually more monstrous than the thugs. In her eyes, Chiron was really just a toy. We were planning to beat him up, and then sell him to the village in the south. Since he's just a commoner, there's nothing to worry about. One of the thugs suggested. Chiron immediately fell into despair. He began to regret not sitting quietly with Mr. Ma. If they were really going to sell him, would he never see his parents again for the rest of his life? Amy looked at Chiron with a judgmental gaze for a long time. Then suddenly a strange smile appeared. A slave shouldn't have any flaws, right? If so, why don't I confirm it myself? The gang of thugs surrounding her immediately burst out laughing. "Ha ha ha ha! Lady Amy, are you going to inspect him? You hear that, kid? She's telling you to take off your clothes." Hearing the words, "take off your clothes," Amy's expression changed, and she automatically stepped back. She had only intended to play with Chiron a little and then let him go. She didn't expect these crazy guys to actually do it. Moreover, Chiron looked like he was about to go crazy. The threatening laughter of the thugs gradually faded in Chiron's mind. Instead, he began to hear more clearly the flapping of a fly's wings passing by. Then space seemed to freeze. Chiron felt his mind drifting back a few hours. He saw Headmaster Alfus and the students sitting under that ancient tree, and he was chanting a spell to create wind to show him what magic looked like. Chiron had no doubt. He was in his own memory. Alfus's spell also became clear in his eyes. Everything poured into Chiron's head and became his own knowledge. While Chiron was out of his body returning to the world of memory in the real world, he was frozen like a log. The thugs, seeing Chiron had no reaction, became angry again, grabbing him by the collar. "This little brat, are you deaf? Do I look like I'm joking?" Only Amy noticed something was wrong here. She quickly shouted, "Stop," but it was too late. Chiron, relying on the memory he had just found, unconsciously deployed that wind-creating spell, just like what Alfus had done. He created a whirlwind large enough to sweep all the thugs into the sky. By the time Chiron came to his senses, they were starting to freefall, and from such a height, it was understandable that they would break their arms and legs. Chiron had defeated nearly a dozen thugs several times his size, with a single move, and he wasn't even sure how he had done it. "Hey," Amy screamed, rushing over, to temporarily pull Chiron back to his senses. "What the hell are you? Where did you learn magic? Why does a commoner like you possess magic?" Just then, a few people attracted by the loud noise ran over. Amy, not wanting to deal with a complicated crowd, quickly slipped away. Chiron was amazed to see her quick as a squirrel fly up to the rooftop of a building and disappear, but that wasn't important now. What was important was the mess in front of Chiron, and he bet the newcomers wouldn't let him explain. Chiron wanted to escape. He couldn't be caught again, and so he started running headfirst out of this alley. His first time leaving the village had left Chiron with too many horrifying experiences. He felt this world was too scary. He wanted to quickly return to the embrace of his parents. That was all. Meanwhile, Amy had returned to her home. Her family, the Sis family, was a first-class nobility. Amy returned in a huff because she had been defeated by a commoner kid. The family head, Kamis Shakora, saw his daughter return and immediately guessed she had caused trouble again. "Back so soon? Did you skip school today?" "I've learned everything, Dad." "There's nothing fun," Amy replied sullenly, then went up to her room. Shakora was at a loss with his daughter. "I don't know when you'll grow up. Even if you're a genius, you can't be so careless. If not one day, you'll be surpassed." Shakora was just speaking casually, but it seemed his last sentence hit a sore spot for Amy. Today, she had really been surpassed, and by a commoner kid at that. Seeing his daughter suddenly become so quiet, Shakora wasn't used to it. Normally, if he criticized her like that, Amy would have thrown a tantrum. But today was different. She was just quiet for a long time, then suddenly asked a question that was not in her usual style. "Dad, about magic? Do you know anyone at the Magic Academy you could introduce me to?" After that stormy trip, Chiron finally found his father. As soon as he found Vincent, he threw himself into his arms, crying and saying he got lost. The two of them returned to their small village, but his personality had changed drastically since then, and winter came. The day after returning home, Vincent only saw his wife knitting a scarf. Olina said that Chiron had gone to the logging area to chop more firewood while it was snowing heavily. Worried, Vincent went to find him. Although they were not blood-related, Vincent had raised Chiron and considered him his own son since childhood. With that fatherly love, he could clearly feel the change in his son after his first trip to the city in the spring. And even though Chiron only said he got lost, Vincent always felt that things were not that simple. At that moment, he was in the forest chopping wood. Even though many days had passed, Chiron still couldn't forget the day he unconsciously unleashed magic to attack those thugs, and since then he hadn't been able to use it again. That spell was successfully summoned by his instinct, but he lacked the basic knowledge of magic, so he couldn't succeed again. Despite that, Chiron had now mastered entering the spiritual world. In the spiritual world, he could feel everything. Just like now, from the sensation, shape, and smell, he could perceive everything related to the tree in front of him at the same time. And he could even see the weakest point of that tree. That helped Chiron to fell a tree 5 or 6 times his body height with a single swing of his axe. This entire scene was witnessed by Vincent. He was an experienced hunter, and he bet that what he had just seen was a thunderstrike, the phenomenon of felling a tree with a single axe blow by hitting its weak point. But how could Chiron, such a small, thin child, do something that even a skilled hunter like Vincent found difficult? Seeing his young son carefully sawing the tree trunk in the cold winter, Vincent couldn't help but cry. Meanwhile, Chiron seemed very excited because this was the first time he had successfully created a thunder strike after countless attempts at chopping trees, just like the day he successfully summoned magic. Chiron knew he was not as lucky as the noble children, but that didn't stop him from yearning to find the foundational knowledge of magic. And tomorrow, the day after, and the days that followed, Chiron would continue to repeat these things to feel magic, because he believed that an opportunity would definitely come to him one day, not far off. Perseverance really did bring Chiron some achievements. Time passed, and 3 years later, Chiron was much taller. His hair had grown longer, and he had successfully created a thunder strike with perfect accuracy. By now, he seemed to have become one with nature. Chiron could even feel the trembling of every bush, the movement of insects, the absorption of nutrients through the roots of every tree. But Chiron knew that wasn't all. If he continued to practice, a new world would open up to him. Today, he had spent 5 hours meditating in the forest to practice his spiritual world. After achieving the desired results, Chiron carried the pile of firewood and returned home. On his way back, he saw 2 white horses. This precious breed of horse usually never appeared in this remote area. In front of Chiron's house, a luxurious carriage was parked. He immediately guessed his family had guests. But when he entered the house, both his father and mother looked very tense, making Chiron a little worried. "You're back. Come in and meet this person," Vincent called. The owner of the luxurious carriage was the head butler of the Ogent family. He introduced himself as Chiron. Chiron didn't know what the other person wanted with him. While the Ogent family was a major noble family ranking second in the entire kingdom, but he still replied politely. Chiron came closer and carefully observed Chiron's face and figure, as if admiring a precious item. "Can you read?" he asked. "I learned a little when I was young." Chiron seemed thoughtful, then started nodding and continued to examine Chiron. "You seem to be well raised. Just the son of a hunter, yet you can read. You're also a good child. Wait, can you explain to me what you're doing here?" Chiron seemed to lose his patience. And finally, Chiron revealed the true purpose of his trip. He was here to recruit Chiron to work for the Ogent family. Although he didn't understand why he knew about him, the job was to move a total of 10,000 books out of the main library of the mansion. Among them were many important books. This would be done over 2 years. The transportation would be handled by others, but the classification would be completed only by Chiron and Chiron. As soon as he heard the word library, Chiron's heart pounded. Moreover, it was the library of the Ogent family. It would surely be full of important knowledge for a mage. However, Chiron continued, "The only people who know about this are your family. If even one book is leaked, or news of this gets out, the lives of both you and your family will be eliminated." Only then did Chiron understand why his parents looked so worried. Of course, because this matter was so dangerous. The Ogent family agreed to pay a lot of money. It was an amount that Vincent couldn't earn even if he hunted for his entire life. Of course, he wasn't greedy for money to the point of being willing to sell his precious son. He agreed to Chiron's request only so that his son could read to his heart's content in the Ogent family's library. "The amount you're being paid is indeed very large, so it's worth you taking care of your son all these years." Chiron seemed very pleased with Chiron and turned to say to Vincent. But these words were no different from saying that Vincent had taken care of Chiron all these years, just to exchange for money. Therefore, he immediately stood up and slammed the table. "I'm not doing it for the money. I just want our Chiron to be able to fulfill his dream." Chiron suddenly burst out laughing. "Ha ha ha ha, why are you thinking so much? You think the boy will have a career. Stop dreaming. If you're not doing it for money, what other reason would make you beg me to choose your son?" His tone was full of ridicule. "Because you said he could read," Vincent almost shouted. Thinking back when he was little, Alina taught Chiron a few words for fun, but unexpectedly by the age of 7, he started reading books on his own to learn. Vincent still remembered clearly how obedient and lovely Chiron looked then, but more importantly, he was an intelligent child. Every time he looked into his beautiful, delicate eyes and his focused expression while reading, Vincent had a thought: could his adopted son be of noble lineage, and if he were raised by a noble family instead of a hunter's family like theirs, would his life be better? Throughout those days, Vincent had to struggle with his thoughts. On one hand, he just wanted to keep Chiron for himself and raise him to be a hunter, a woodcutter like himself. But when he saw Chiron spending several hours a day in the forest, diligently chopping wood, he felt very uncomfortable. Therefore, it was Vincent himself who took the initiative to find Timurin after hearing that the Ogent family was looking for a literate commoner child. All Vincent wanted was for Chiron to go there and read the books he wanted. That's why he came to beg and plead with Timurin. But he never expected this man with eyes higher than his head would think Vincent wanted to sell his son for money. This made him really angry. "I don't need any of your money. If I knew you would look at me with that kind of gaze, I wouldn't have come to beg you. Now get out of my house immediately." Timurin was also an arrogant person. Being scolded directly to his face by Vincent, he immediately turned to leave. But just as his foot reached the door, Chiron quickly called him back. He said he would take the job. No matter how dangerous it was or how much Timurin looked down on his family. "Are you serious? I'm not threatening you. I'm telling you beforehand, even a small rumor can take your life," Timurin warned. But even so, Chiron remained very determined. He asserted that he could keep his mouth shut in all circumstances, and if anything unexpected happened, he would not resent Timurin or the Ogent family. Seeing the young man's determination, Timurin didn't bother to persuade him anymore. He said he would send a carriage to pick up Chiron within a week. During that time, if he refused and changed his mind, it would be fine. But once Chiron stepped into the Ogent mansion, he would not be allowed to leave until the job was finished. After instructing Chiron, Timurin didn't stay long. Only the 3 family members were left. Vincent frantically asked his son Chiron, "Why did you agree to such a request? Those bastards just need someone to die for them." "This is my fault. I will take responsibility. So you should refuse immediately." Vincent's face was covered in tears, and at this moment, Chiron also started to cry. But he cried not because he blamed Vincent for pushing him into a pit of fire, but because he knew he had given him such a great gift. Because stepping into the Ogent library and reading the precious magic books inside was an opportunity Chiron would never dare to dream of in his lifetime. "Dad, thank you so much," Chiron cried, but there was a radiant smile on his lips. Vincent quickly hugged him tightly constantly, comforting him. "Don't worry, Chiron, and you must come back safely. I guarantee they won't be able to touch a single hair on this family." At that moment, Vincent really didn't know if his actions were right or not. Olena also couldn't hold back her tears, worried for her son. But if he wanted to go, the 2 of them couldn't hold him back. A week later, Timurin sent someone to pick up Chiron as promised. After having Vincent sign a commitment form, they hastily took him away. The carriage door closed and started to move. Chiron quickly entered his spiritual world. He could see Vincent and Olena hugging each other and crying miserably. In his subconscious, Chiron wanted to reach out and touch them, but the last shred of reason made him pull his hand back. Yes, this opportunity was a double-edged sword. Although working for the Ogent family was dangerous, it would also bring Chiron many things, and he would not tremble and retreat. Speaking of the Ogent family, their main house was located inside the city of Grace in the kingdom of Tomia, away from the capital of Basuki. They normally trained orthodox swordsmen. The previous head of the family was a 3rd-level swordsman, and the current head, Bishop Ogent, was a 4th-level orthodox knight. In short, they had the ability to influence the powerful forces in the city. It's unknown how long it took, but the carriage arrived in front of the Ogent mansion. This was Chiron's first time stepping into a noble family's home, and a 2nd-class noble at that, a very powerful force in the kingdom. The grand and magnificent scene in front of him truly overwhelmed him. The 2 people in charge of welcoming Chiron led him to the administration room, which also served as the butler's lounge, and the place where he would stay for the next 2 years. Here, Timurin was already waiting. He didn't give Chiron any time to rest, but immediately led him to the family's great library to explain the tasks Chiron needed to do. Stepping into the Ogent family's library, Chiron was even more overwhelmed. He had never seen so many books, and for a book lover like Chiron, this was paradise. Because the Ogent family had built a new library, the books here would be moved there, and Chiron's task was to organize them. He would receive a list every week, and based on the titles on it, he would find and gather them. Working hours were from 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. daily. Outside of that time, Chiron was allowed to rest, but not to go out, and he was not allowed to enter the manor without permission. Timurin was the head butler, so he would be busier, but besides him, There would be other butlers to teach him the etiquette of entering this family. "Do you have any more questions?" Timuran asked. Chiron was still digesting the information the other had just told him. He felt this was truly an opportunity worth risking his life for. "When do I start working?" Chiron replied with a counter-question, "Starting tomorrow." And so the next morning, Chironi changed into a brand new butler's uniform, holding the list, and went to the great library. After a night of racking his brain, he finally understood why a family as large as the Ogent family would only hire one person to handle the task of arranging books. Perhaps it was because they needed a consistent standard for book arrangement. For example, if a book titled History of Swordsmanship needed to be arranged, each person would have a different opinion on whether it should be placed in the swordsmanship section or the comprehensive history section. And another thing Chiron realized, when experiencing the arrangement systems, was that all knowledge was interconnected, and the core element connecting them was history. Knowledge was gradually built upon a straight line called history. History was the backbone of knowledge. After studying history thoroughly and using it to reinforce other fields, Chiron's reading speed also increased significantly. Among the 10,000 books here, about 850 were history books, and he planned to read them all within the 2 years here to achieve his greatest dream of becoming a mage. Time passed slowly, and Chiron adapted very quickly to his work. That evening, while secretly reading a book in the library, Chiron heard footsteps. It was Timuran, with a deputy butler. Chiron quickly put away the book in his hand, because after all, his reading books here was not proper. "Have you arranged everything properly? You're working overtime again, aren't you?" "Yes, sir." Chiron quickly stood up straight and answered seriously. Timuran didn't suspect anything, only reminding Chiron not to overexert himself because he still had 2 years in this library. And most importantly, he had to take responsibility for everything he did. If he let his body get tired and made a mistake, his head could roll off at any moment. After leaving the new list, Timuran left. But after a few steps, he suddenly turned around and walked straight towards Chirone, making him very tense. "What is this? Did he find out I was secretly reading the library's books during overtime?" But fortunately, Timuran only came to adjust the bow tie on Chiron's neck. It's not just butlers in this library. The family head and young masters also pay attention to your uniform, and make sure you're not lowering the face of the Ogent family. Timuran also reminded Chiron to trim his long hair. Then he really left. Chiron breathed a sigh of relief. He started to think about tying his hair up neatly like his father. But in reality, there was something more worth thinking about. The knowledge in the books was truly difficult. After Timuran and the deputy butler left, Chirone started struggling with the massive amount of information again. He originally wanted to memorize it quickly, but if he wanted to access the knowledge of a book at any time, Chiron had to understand every event in it clearly, and so he tried to cram more words into his head. But after working hard all day, Chirone quickly couldn't resist the drowsiness and collapsed on the table. When he was sound asleep, a hand reached out and took the book he was reading. It was Timuran, who had returned at some point. What a fool, he muttered to himself, holding this book for a whole month. "You think you can succeed just through study? If you had read books with practical use, I would have banned you from coming here outside of work hours. However, it's fortunate that you're just a fool with willpower." 3 months had passed. Chiron had gotten used to working in the great library of the Ogent family. He also learned many other things from the maids. After 3 months of work, Chiron also realized something. The nobility didn't really care about 1 or 2 books going missing. This also meant that there were probably no overly important books in the library, but that didn't mean Chiron would be safer. So he still maintained the same stance as when Timuran found him. He was not allowed to make any mistakes. While he was lost in thought, the door of the great library was suddenly thrown open, followed by a voice that pierced Chiron's eardrums. "That damn old man!" He jumped up, startled. The one who had just burst in was a blue-haired young man with a tall, large frame. According to Chiron's understanding, this was the youngest master of this family, Rian Ogent. Following Rian was another voice, this time even more terrifying. "Rian, how dare you run away? Wait until I catch you, you'll have to run another 100 laps. Rian rushed towards Chiron, then crawled under the nearby table. Before hiding, he didn't forget to remind him not to tell the person coming that he was hiding here. Rian's large body created a lot of pressure for Chiron. But the person who burst into the great library after him had an even larger body. "I know you're hiding here, Rian." "Hey, you there! A pea-sized kid with blue hair just burst in here, right?" Chiron was speechless. If that blue-haired kid was the size of a pea, what was his own skinny body in the eyes of this old man? But he looked so scary. Chiron had to first probe the other's identity. "Excuse me, may I ask who you are, sir?" "I'm a swordsmanship teacher. I'm the teacher who has the right to beat that pea into a pulp, you got it." The words, "you got it," really wanted to pierce Chiron's eardrums. He felt that if he didn't answer, this old man would bury him. So although the youngest master had strongly warned him, Chiron still had to honestly confess that he was hiding under the bookshelf next to them. Ryan's swordsmanship teacher immediately used one hand to grab him by the collar and pull him out. "Master, this is just a misunderstanding," Ryan frantically explained, but the other gave him no chance. Ryan was thrown hard to the ground by his master, who then used his hand to pull his leg and drag him away. "Come with me, you scoundrel, daring to skip practice. You need to have your consciousness re-educated." Rian looked extremely pained. Chiron could clearly see his lips forming the words to him, "Then you will pay for this." But since Ryan's swordsmanship teacher looked even more powerful than the family head, Chiron only had this choice. After that day, Chiron vaguely heard that the youngest master had been caught and taken to the mountains for training. So in the following days, no one suddenly burst into the library shouting and startling him anymore. In the following days at the Great Library, Chiron continued to complete his work, while also taking the opportunity to read. He finished the first book in 20 days, but after understanding the entire book, he read 82 books in just 4 months. Everything progressed just as Chiron thought. Only the beginning was quite difficult. After that, no book contained completely new content. If he built a foundation with the first 200 books, the remaining 650 books would be easier to absorb. When Chiron read books about the history and origins of magic, he also began to have doubts about whether studying the history and origins of magic at this time was the right choice. But because he had already studied the formation of all things before, he became even more certain that this decision was correct. Because if a scholar creates a theorem, a mage is the same, but they also have to realize that theory to apply it in practice. Therefore, a mage is similar to a scholar. However, not all scholars are mages, because not everyone can enter that state of selfless senses in consciousness, which is the spiritual world. Therefore, Chiron had even more faith that with his spiritual world, as long as he absorbed a large amount of knowledge transmitted in these books, he could become a real mage. It was thought that Chiron's peaceful days would last forever. Until that evening, Rian returned in a rage. "Hey, you bastard! I've been through hell waiting for this day." It was still the blue hair, the tall body, and the deafening voice. Chiron secretly broke into a cold sweat. This young master was really persistent. After going through such a torturous ordeal on the mountain, he still remembered the grudge of being exposed by him in this library. Ryan was so angry that his teeth chattered. "Do you have any idea how much trouble I've been through, you bastard?" Then he began to talk about how his master had tortured him like climbing cliffs countless times until his fingers had no strength left. But every time he thought he was about to die, Ryan remembered the grudge in the library with the one who pushed him into this situation, and as if getting a power boost, Chiron secretly sighed. This young master wasn't just holding a grudge. It seemed his anger had been accumulating and had reached its peak. "Don't you dare open your mouth to talk. I asked you for help and trusted you, but you turned on me to report me to my master. Just looking at a coward like you makes me sick." While speaking, Rian grabbed Chiron's collar. "That's not it. I was just telling the truth. Don't try to justify yourself. You should have said you wouldn't follow my request back then." Chiron secretly sighed. It seemed he couldn't reason with someone who was angry and had overwhelming strength like this. "So, young master, what should I do?" Rian seemed surprised to be questioned back by Chiron with such a calm demeanor. Then he burst out laughing and dragged Chiron to the sword practice ground, even though it was the middle of the night. Chiron thought the other intended to use a sword to beat him until he was satisfied. He didn't want to lose the opportunity that his parents had risked their lives to beg for him, so he also determined to lie still and take Ryan's blows. However, after looking at the pile of weapons hanging on the rack for a while, Ryan casually grabbed a wooden sword and threw it to Chiron. He requested Chiron to have a one-on-one duel with him. "I'm not a coward like you. The price for underestimating me is already set. You, who are destined to become a great swordsman, will have to bear the wrath of my sword." What did I do that was cowardly, young master? Because he had been labeled a coward by Ryan all this time. Chiron also seemed agitated and retorted, As a servant in the Ogent family, you should have protected a member of the Ogent family. Yet you betrayed me to my master just because you were afraid of getting beaten. Isn't that cowardice? When Rian said these words, Chiron could clearly feel that the look in his eyes had changed, becoming somewhat fierce. Chiron unconsciously tightened his grip on the sword in his hand, and that was also what Rian wanted. Because of the large skill gap between them, he allowed Chiron to make the first 3 moves. Chiron was extremely tense. Although this was just a wooden sword and couldn't kill him, wood is very hard. If he broke a bone, Chiron would also be sent home and lose this job. A question kept appearing in his mind. What should I do now? After a few seconds of thought, Chiron gripped the sword tightly and attacked strongly, but Rian easily dodged this first move. The second time Chiron struck, he used his own sword to block it. Unlike Chiron's trembling grip on the sword, Rian clearly had a more fundamental foundation. His strength was also very superior. Sweat dripped down Chiron's neck. He had only one last chance to attack the opponent, and if he failed this time, Chiron would lose completely. He focused all his spirit and entered his spiritual world. In the spiritual realm, Chiron could feel the weakest point on the opponent's sword, just like the times he had successfully created a thunder strike when chopping wood. After identifying the target, Chiron immediately launched his attack. Rian immediately raised his sword to defend, even mocking him for his ridiculously clumsy attacking posture. However, when Chiron's sword came down, Rian could no longer laugh, because the sword in his hand was instantly shattered into many pieces. Rian seemed terrified. He stared at the sword in his hand for a long time. Chiron's sword was also broken, but he had succeeded. Rian had given him 3 moves. He used the first move to feel the force and calculate the opponent's timing, the second to execute his intention, and the third to realize it. This was the thunder strike he had practiced for 3 years. Hey, Rian trembled. Where did you learn swordsmanship? This isn't swordsmanship. It's just a thunder strike, Chiron answered honestly, huh? Seeing Rian's confused expression, Chiron even kindly explained that his father was a hunter, and he had followed him to chop trees on the mountain since he was a child. Because his physique was too weak, he couldn't chop wood in the normal way, so he figured out this move to make wood chopping easier. And Thunder Strike was the name the woodcutters gave it. Rian felt more and more confused. Such a powerful blow was figured out by the other person while chopping wood, while he had held a sword for 15 years and lost to the son of a woodcutter. Moreover, what Chiron just called a thunder strike was the secret fatal sword technique of the Ogent family, which Rian's older brother Rai had learned when he was only 12. At that time, Rian had been defeated by Rai with this very move. Today, he was defeated by Chiron with the same skill. I will not accept this. Rian's hands clenched into fists, unable to stop himself from roaring. Seeing the opponent's expression become more and more serious, Chiron, who had just relaxed a little, started to get tense again. Young master, did I upset you? Rian's mouth snapped shut. Then he took out another sword. This time it was a real sword, and he threw it towards Chiron. Since both of our weapons were destroyed, this match isn't over. If you have mastered the fatal sword technique, then I should treat you accordingly. Chiron's heart wanted to jump out of his chest. Don't tell me the young master has gone crazy and wants to fight him with a real sword. Fortunately, Rian wasn't that crazy. The duel with real swords was real, but before that, he would give Chiron a month to prepare. A month sounded long, but for someone with no foundation in swordsmanship, like Chiron, it was really useless. He held the sword in his hand, his whole body trembling. If it was a real sword, he could really die. Chiron didn't want to risk his life, so he begged Rian to reconsider. Since he had never learned swordsmanship in his life, how could he duel? But Rian had no intention of taking back his words. That's why I'm giving you a month. If you're capable of mastering the fatal sword technique just by chopping wood, then you'll manage somehow. And don't even think about running away, because I will definitely surpass you. The sword in his hand was not too heavy, but Chiron felt it was truly crushing his heart. After returning to the Great Library and gathering information, Chiron finally understood why the youngest master reacted so strongly. The reason was that the people of the Ogent family were said to have 2 hair colors, black and blue. The clan head Ogent Bov had black hair and had 3 sons and 1 daughter. His eldest son had black hair and was now a 6th-level swordsman. The eldest daughter had blue hair and possessed a special talent for music, so she was now a musician in the palace, instead of following her family's path of swordsmanship. The The second son, Ogent, also had black hair and was the one who learned the fatal sword technique at the age of 12, considered a genius. But Rian Ogent was said to be completely different from his siblings. The servants in the house all agreed that he was quite untalented, even though he had his own private tutor. Chiron's mood was extremely down. He began to regret why he didn't just let Rian beat him up with the wooden sword instead of resisting, which led to this situation. Rian's self-esteem had been severely damaged, and it seemed he was determined to win a match against Chiron to release his psychological burden. Chiron even cried from the stress. If he died in the duel with Rian a month later, his parents would probably not be able to live in peace either. Thinking of his parents, Chiron did not allow himself to continue to lose his spirit. "Think you're going to become a mage," Chiron thought to himself. Then he started looking for books in the library. When he lived on the mountain, Chiron had been very confident in his physical strength. Therefore, he felt that as long as he learned a few defensive skills, he would definitely be able to survive. And so Chiron began to study everything within his ability. Meanwhile, Rian started to train like crazy. His sudden enthusiasm surprised his swordsmanship master. Even the kid who always skipped practice was now asking him for more intense training methods. The swordsmanship teacher was not stupid. He quickly realized that something had happened to Rian, but he only replied that nothing was wrong. Seeing Rian's determination, he didn't press further. Instead, he started to give him a much more brutal, devilish training regimen. While Rian was sweating profusely at the practice ground, Chiron was carefully studying the force diagram. It was considered a simple diagram of the human body. If mages had the spiritual realm, swordsmen had the force diagram to help them visualize their bodies. The force diagram could push their limits to the extreme. The person who mastered the force diagram could use and perfectly control every cell in their body. This was the most important factor in becoming a swordsman. This aspect was completely opposite to the spiritual realm that Chiron had opened, but it also made him feel interested. "Should I try it?" Chiron thought to himself, and he acted on his thought. Chiron closed the book in his hand, closed his eyes, and began to feel himself. This was the first step in opening the force diagram, and it was quite simple because it was similar to entering the spiritual realm. If opening the spiritual realm required one to erase themselves, opening the force diagram required them to delve deep into their own existence. In fact, Chiron didn't want to put all his effort into the force diagram because it was the opposite of the spiritual realm. So he shifted his focus to learning some basic swordsmanship skills. With his existing spiritual realm foundation, Chiron carried a pile of books on sword techniques to the backyard. He started with the most basic things, the 8 directions of slashing. At the same time, Rian was still forcing himself to practice to the point that even his sword instructor was scared. He had never seen his student so agitated, even though he had taught him since he was a child. Rian's mood was very complicated. In fact, Chiron was just the last straw. The core of the problem was that Rian was always compared to his older siblings, and the fact that he had been practicing the sword for 15 years and still hadn't opened the force diagram made him the failure of the Ogent family. His sword master, although he seemed like a rigid person, was actually very sentimental. Today, seeing the terrifying change in his student, he really shed tears. "Rian, that's enough. We'll stop here for today." The sword in Rian's hand was caught by his teacher. Only then did he feel that all the muscles in his body were sore. Rian obediently put down his sword, then sat down and began to look into the distance. "What are you thinking about?" Rian's master asked while wiping his sweat. "I'm thinking my hands hurt like hell. Rian, I never knew you could try so hard, but I think you've done very well. Have you ever thought about what you've done best so far?" He suddenly asked. "I don't know. I only know what I don't do well." "Yes, that's exactly it. That's why you're not a genius." Rian got angry. He thought his master was being sarcastic. But when he turned to look, Rian saw that his face was very serious, his eyes full of emotion. He said that all geniuses know what they are best at, and they only put in the effort to act when they are 1000% confident that they will do it well. But geniuses also have a fear, the hard work to achieve the impossible. A burning will to challenge the impossible. That will and determination are the nemesis of geniuses. "Thank you, Master." Rian smiled faintly. "Of all the encouragement I've ever heard, I like these words. The best." His sword instructor didn't just say those words casually. Those words really activated Rian's strong fighting will. If talent wasn't something he had from the beginning, then he would grit his teeth and train it out of himself through hard work. Rian wanted to use his determination to turn the impossible into the possible. He wanted to win. And coincidentally, that was also the thought of Chiron, who was struggling to practice basic swordsmanship right now. Chiron was also very serious with his first sword strikes. Swordsmanship is the process of learning actions to take the lives of others, so its dark side is a high-stakes psychological battle of life and death. Without a practice partner, Chiron could only grip the sword Rian threw at him tightly, imagining an invisible enemy in front of him, and that enemy could attack him from many directions. In fact, when attacking with a sword, there are 8 major directions, and that enemy could attack him from many directions. In fact, when attacking with a sword, there are 8 major directions, and that enemy could attack him from many directions. In fact, when attacking with a sword, there are 8 major directions. Had trained himself in those 8 slashes, as well as how to counter them. He kept practicing like that, then discovered that the path of swordsmanship was as infinite as magic, and all the things Chiron learned on his own were just like a grain of sand in the desert. "Mom, Dad, I'm sorry, but maybe I can't go home this time," Chiron said to himself, his voice full of sorrow. But since stepping into the Ogent family, he had never regretted it. Although the path he walked had to face death, he had also seen a wonderful world. A month passed quickly. Chiron arrived at the practice ground on time and entered a life-and-death duel with Rian. In just one short month, he could clearly feel that. The aura on the other person had completely changed, and that was also what Rian felt in Chiron, because just a month ago, he had appeared in a very chaotic state in terms of both posture and center of gravity, but now Chiron was very stable. Even though it was the first time he held a real sword, he was still very calm. This made Rian unable to help but associate Chiron with his brother Ray, and it made him want to win even more. Rian was the one who rushed forward first. Chiron was extremely tense, because even if this young master was said to be untalented by the servants, his level of swordsmanship was on a different level compared to him. But luckily, because of his tireless efforts over the past month, Chiron could still feel the direction of the sword. The calmness and way Chiron observed the sword's direction made the hot blood rush to Rian's brain. Isn't he afraid of this blade, he wondered to himself. In fact, Chiron wasn't a reckless person who wasn't afraid of death. But he had completely controlled his emotions. On this side, Rian continued to attack. This time the sword came from the right. Chiron managed to block it again, but while the first and second strikes were gentle, the speed of Rian's subsequent strikes increased, starting to surpass Chiron's ability to perceive the sword's direction. Finally, the tip of Rian's sword successfully made a shallow cut on Chiron's chest. When the fresh blood flowed, he knew he was about to lose. Chiron quickly changed his plan, using all his speed to retreat backward. Besides the pain coming from his chest, there was an inexplicable confusion. Rian looked into his eyes and seemed to understand his confusion, which made him even more pleased. What he had just used was the Ogent sword technique to train for the great sword. Each slash was the result of Rian's bone-breaking efforts, so its power was completely different from ordinary sword techniques. After injuring Chiron, he became even more bloodthirsty. In Rian's eyes now, there was only one goal: to crush Chiron with his strength. They continued into the second round, but this time Chiron felt confused again. If Rian had slashed upwards after hitting his chest, Chiron would have been cut on the side. But Rian's subsequent attacks didn't seem to be finishing blows. This also meant that his understanding of swordsmanship was lower than Chiron thought. Rian could skillfully swing his sword, but didn't understand how to use the techniques effectively. This was the opening for Chiron to turn the tables. He immediately changed his battle plan by attacking with all his might. Chiron had learned the basic sword swings, so his strikes were relatively decisive, and Rian was truly surprised once again. Why is he suddenly attacking? Isn't he exhausted? He wondered to himself, and Rian became even more confused as the techniques Chiron used were quite simple, yet he couldn't block them. Rian went from being in an advantageous position, attacking wildly, to suddenly being on the defensive. Noticing the opponent's physical strength declining after the clumsy blocks, Chiron had more hope of preserving his small life. He just needed to persevere, maintain his stamina, and continue this attacking rhythm to win. On this side, Rian's mentality was fluctuating violently. Chiron's overwhelming presence made the ghosts of the past reappear in his head. Rian remembered his brother Rai, who was praised by his father as a genius and was the one who defeated him with the fatal sword technique. When he remembered his brother's arrogant, satisfied smile when he defeated him, Rian's anger exploded once again, and he directed that anger at Chiron. Rian's sudden loss of composure made Chiron think he had given up. However, at that moment, a new problem arose. Rian was indeed not calm, but that outburst of anger had greatly increased his sword-swinging speed. It was so fast that Chiron couldn't read all the sword directions, and in the final blow, he felt as if death had come to pat him on the shoulder. But with such a strong protagonist's halo, of course, this old fellow wouldn't die. Neither of them hit each other, because Rian's sword was knocked away by Chiron's. He stood there dazed and confused, while Chiron was so tired he couldn't breathe. Rian could clearly see that, in that final blow, Chiron had read the direction of his sword and had changed his grip in an instant. The tip of Chiron's sword was pointing upwards, directly clashing with the blade of Rian's sword coming down. With all his remaining strength, he had won against Rian by knocking his sword away. Chiron opened his mouth to breathe. He had won, but still couldn't believe that he had actually won. And even though he had really won, Chiron still felt very awkward. Although it was a duel, the opponent was still a noble, and he had once again trampled on his already high self-esteem. He didn't know what Rian might do next. Chiron was very nervous. He couldn't imagine what kind of anger Rian's next outburst might drive him to. But this time Rian wasn't angry. He just lowered his head and said 3 words. I lost. While Chiron was still trying to process it, Rian continued to scratch his head and repeat the 3 words. I lost a few more times with a flustered look. I lost, and you won. Since I lost, even if you decide to take my life, I have nothing to say. Chiron was a little surprised. He didn't think Rian could admit defeat so frankly, and even let him decide his fate. But he was a noble. How could he survive if he touched a single hair on him? What ridiculous things are you saying? Young Master Chiron almost shouted at Rian. We fought with our lives on the line, and I have admitted that I lost. So you have the right to take my life, don't you? Rian replied foolishly. Only you wanted to bet your life on this. I want to live, Chiron yelled. That means from the beginning I found this match really boring. From the beginning, why did you blame me and want to beat me up when you were the one who avoided your master just because you didn't want to practice? The anger went straight to his brain, and Chiron was no longer afraid, frankly criticizing the young master in front of him. Rian also refused to lose, and immediately started his sharp-tongued retort. Wait a minute, you bastard, who needs to be blamed? It's all because you're a coward. Even though it was the first time we met, and in that situation, you should still respect me, right? Respect my ass. Chiron cut him off. Have you ever thought about how much trouble you've caused me? I was stuck between the son of the family head and your swordmaster. If you were really worthy of respect, you wouldn't have put a small servant like me in such a situation. The more Chiron spoke, the more enthusiastic he became, venting all his frustrations by scolding Rian to his face. To be honest, this young master was a real brat. He wanted to challenge Chiron because of his high self-esteem, not to push Chiron to his death. But Chiron really thought he was going to die this time. After scolding Rian for a while, he was so tired, he sat down on the ground. On the opposite side, Rian had just been scolded by a servant in his own house without a chance to react. But the strange thing was, he wasn't angry at all. In the moment Chiron just vented, Rian felt that the cold, calm warrior he had just faced had disappeared. Instead, there was a teenager about his own age. And most importantly, although Rian felt that Chiron was definitely a genius, he didn't laugh at Rian the way Rai did. Instead, Chiron just went all out to face Rian, both to protect himself and to respect his opponent. Because of these things, Rian had a different view of the teenager in front of him. What's your name? He suddenly asked Aryan Chiron. Chiron didn't know what the other person meant, but he still answered absent-mindedly. And I'm Ogent Rian, Rian said clearly. Chiron once again felt confused. Who didn't know this blue-haired young man was Ogent Rian? And the confusion reached its peak when Rian suddenly reached out his hand wanting to pull Chiron up. Along with it was an offer. Let's be friends. The duel between the two ended like that. Chiron continued to return to his work. A year had passed since he first set foot in the Ogent mansion, and in total Chiron had sorted 7028 out of 453 books. This progress was much faster than expected. Even a picky person like Tamaran couldn't help but leave a word of praise. because the number of books that needed to be sorted by Chiron had decreased a lot. His work efficiency was also improved. Moreover, his goal of reading all 850 history books was now only 200 books away. Every day he read up to 3 books, and soon Chiron would complete the foundational knowledge he had always dreamed of. Not only that, thanks to Rian, he also got to experience swordsmanship and understand the nature of fear. As a result, it seemed that the endurance of the spiritual realm in Chiron had also increased. Although the beginning was quite slow, he knew that as long as he didn't give up, he would eventually achieve his goal. And most importantly, Chiron had found his first good friend in his life, who was also the one who shouted at him in their first meeting. After that duel, Rian was almost always rooted in the great library to talk to Chironi, and he also realized that he was quite emotional and had very cute aspects, completely contrary to his towering appearance, although sometimes Rian still behaved in a way that gave Chiron a headache. For example, messing up the pile of books he had just sorted. All in all, this friend was still quite valuable. It's just that after becoming close friends, Rian started to get lazy with his training. For example, today, after finishing the basic practice, he told his master he wanted to go to the library to study and then rooted himself there. Chiron also knew that this seemingly lazy person was actually a smoldering fire that could erupt at any time. Rian would get stronger as long as he had the opportunity, so there was no need to push him to practice too hard. And so Chironi agreed to let Rian stay in the library and read with him. But after only 10 minutes, Rian was already drowsy from the words in the book. Chiron, didn't you say you wanted to become a mage? Do you really have to read so many books? 800 of them? You're crazy, Rian lamented. Of course. Actually, I'm falling behind. Before I came here, I didn't have any opportunity to study. But now that I've read over 600 history books, I know almost everything. Rian had no interest in reading, so he just focused on observing Chirone, and every time he watched him work, he had to be amazed again. Chiron's reading speed was unbelievably fast to the point that Rian felt Chiron could be pulled into the book at any moment. Because he was so bored, Rian would read a few words and then start chatting with Chiron. The two of them together were as noisy as a free-for-all lobby. Chiron also couldn't concentrate on his reading because of this. The two began to argue about the book in Rian's hand. It was about the most common comparison on the continent. If a swordsman and a mage faced off, who would win? Of course the swordsman would win. A voice rang out from behind the bookshelf. As soon as Chiron heard it, he jumped up. Because the owner of this voice was Ogent Rai, the second young master of the Ogent family, and the brother that Rian hated with a passion. Chiron was extremely tense, fearing that their conversation had been overheard by Rai. A servant who dared to speak disrespectfully to a noble's child would not be let off easily. Rai's eyes now looked like they wanted to pierce through him. Seeing Chiron's unnaturalness, Rian had to speak up to cover for him. Why do you talk as if you already know the result? Are you sure you're not siding with the swordsman just because you are one yourself? Oh, I didn't think you'd pay attention to this. Just look at the status of swordsmen and mages on the continent and you'll see. Rian burst out laughing. We're talking about fighting. What does their status have to do with it? Do people choose their positions on the battlefield, based on military rank? I'm sure you don't mean to say such nonsensical things. Rian showed a clear attitude of opposition, but Rai couldn't be bothered. Instead, he turned to Chirone, who was standing next to him. Oh, you over there! What do you think? It was just a very normal question, but Chirone felt an invisible pressure from the opponent. He couldn't guess Rai's purpose and whether he would be safe if he didn't give the answer he wanted. However, Chiron couldn't ignore the opponent's question either. He could only cautiously state his opinion. He thought that if the level of the swordsman and the mage were equivalent, the swordsman would have a hard time winning once the mage entered their spiritual realm. But if the swordsmen used their excellent physical strength to fight before the mage could enter the spiritual realm, they could definitely win. No, you're wrong. Rai cut Chiron off. He had somehow moved in front of him. Rai was taller than Chiron, so his aura was also very overwhelming. You're wrong. The mage will lose. When he said these words, there was a triumphant smile on Rai's face. This familiar superior look made Rian extremely annoyed. This trait of Rai had appeared since he was a child. Whenever he felt annoyed with someone, he enjoyed trampling on what they valued. Before it was Rian, now Rai wanted to pressure Chiron. You seem to love history, huh? I'm sure you've heard of the 5 divine armors, right? The holy relics capable of breaking a mage's spiritual world. I'm talking about magic resistance. Chiron was stunned by Rai's words. A mage's innate ability is the spiritual realm. Fighting a mage in their spiritual realm is like fighting a shark in the deep sea. However, there is something that can stir the water and distract the shark. That is why the thing called magic resistance, which Rai just mentioned, was born. If the spiritual world has no ability to affect, then magic also cannot. Once someone possesses a holy relic with this attribute, a mage can do nothing to them. But in the end, this is still just a theory. Previously, magic resistance was a precious power created from the mana flow in a dragon's heart. This alone made its value very high. Besides, due to frequency fluctuations, no matter how much wealth was poured into it, its effectiveness could not be improved. Even a master mage like Iekra was only able to use up to 65% of the 5 divine armor's ability. So the price to obtain a holy relic was even higher. Of course, today, it also has historical value. So the value of magic resistance is equivalent to the annual budget of an entire kingdom. But the biggest issue here is that the creators of magic resistance were also mages. They created things to counter themselves, because the demand for it was very high, so it was very easy to profit from it. Those mages are lining up to be employed. A mage is just a profession where pathetic people try to sell their own weaknesses to make money. Rai's voice was thick with contempt. Rian was extremely indignant, because he knew Chiron was nurturing a dream of becoming a mage, and Rai was blatantly insulting that profession. However, the one who should have been angry, Chiron didn't seem to have much change in his emotional state. That is the nature of a mage. He suddenly smiled brightly and said, This attitude of Chironi surprised both Ogent brothers, especially Rai. What did you say? He thought he had misheard, and asked. Again, you're not wrong, sir. Magic resistance was indeed created by mages. It's used to limit the ability of magic in a magic forbidden zone, and it's also used effectively in assisting the training of magic students. Chirone's knowledge was no less than Rai's. He knew that magic resistance was indeed used against mages, but its existence was like an intellectual achievement serving good purposes, and because of that, Chiron still maintained his view that Rai's belief that swordsmen were nobler than mages was just a one-sided wrong opinion. Rai, the dignified second young master of the Ogent family, was used to being sharp-tongued and trampling on others. Today in his own home, he was pressed back by Chirone with a nonchalant tone, but his attitude was still very proper, making it impossible for Rai to find any fault. The theory you talk about and reality are two very different things. No matter what the truth is, that a mage will never be able to defeat a swordsman. After saying that, Rai left in a huff. Only then could Chiron let out a sigh of relief. Just now, when young Master Rai appeared with such a scary face, he thought he was about to die. Rian was also very happy because he had finally found a sharp tongue to retort to Rai for him. After that event, Rai no longer came to the library to cause trouble. Chiron also had more time to concentrate on his work because of this. 6 months later, as winter arrived, he had also completed his task of sorting over 10,000 books. The time to complete the work was even 6 months faster than expected. Timurin seemed very relieved that the books that had been neglected for 20 years were finally clearly sorted. Chiron had completed his mission and was supposed to return home, but a butler from the Ogent family seemed reluctant to lose such a useful worker. He wanted to force an extension of the contract with Chiron for some ridiculous reason, but Timurin did not agree with this. Meanwhile, Chiron in the Great Library had finished reading the last book he needed to read, completing his 1.5-year journey of devouring books from the noble Ogent family. Rian, who was practicing his sword, rushed over after hearing that he had finished the book-sorting task. He was worried that Chirone would just go home like that. Seeing that Chirone had read all 800-plus books, Rian looked even more excited than Chiron himself. To celebrate this, Chirone wanted to do something special, and he suggested Rian take him on a tour of his family's mansion. Although they were in the same manor, most of the time they only met in the library. Moreover, it was Rian who actively came, because Chiron was just a worker, and had no opportunity to see what a real noble's home was like. Coincidentally, today, the entire Ogent family was out and would return in the afternoon, so Rian happily agreed to his request. Chiron had already thought the great library was very large, but when he stepped inside the mansion, he was truly overwhelmed. A single room here was probably as big as his entire house. Rian was truly the young master of a rich family, yet he was not at all arrogant. On the contrary, he was a bit clueless. Rian took Chiron to visit his bedroom. It was the smallest room at the end of the hallway. Chiron had prepared himself to be dazzled by the luxury upon entering. But the truth was, Ryan's bedroom was much simpler than the other rooms, and importantly, it was filled with training equipment and swords. The messy bed looked like a temporary resting area after practice. Chiron couldn't believe his eyes. A young master like Rian lived in such a simple place. You really can't judge a book by its cover. After the tour, Chiron and Rian decided to play poker. However, Ryan kept complaining about losing. You're cheating with your spiritual realm, aren't you? What do you think I am to resort to such despicable tricks? Chiron then revealed to Ryan how he guessed the cards. It's the way you win. You have a habit of putting the aces on the outside, and the way you bet when you have a pair or not is also quite easy to recognize. Ryan was hit right where it hurt and really wanted to throw a tantrum right there. Observation skills will be effective right away when you're not focused on any particular thought. So when observing an opponent, you should observe all of their actions. Then you can guess what they are thinking. Chiron sincerely pointed this out to Rian, hoping he would soon break through a new limit for himself. But unexpectedly, before he could finish 2 sentences, Ryan had already fallen asleep. Chiron was about to return to his restroom when he heard a melodious piano sound. The melody, timbre, and tempo were all perfectly controlled by the player. Chiron unconsciously followed the music. He knew that in this world only one person could play to this level, Rian's older sister. Raina Ogent, how is it, my sonata? After the piano stopped, Raina suddenly asked, making Chiron, who was hiding behind the long door jump. Seeing that the other had discovered him, he didn't hide anymore and walked straight in front of her. I think it's very good. Chiron's mood started to get tense again. Maybe because he was in front of a noble's daughter, or maybe because Raina was too beautiful. Hello, this is the first time I've met you. Are you new? Raina continued to ask. Yes, my lady. I'm in charge of sorting books in the library, and it's been a year now. Raina said, oh, because she had heard Chiron's name before as an intelligent child who could sort over 10,000 books on his own. If so, have you ever played the piano before? Chiron really wanted to refuse because besides Ryan, he didn't want to get involved with any other nobles. Moreover, Raina was an expert at using the force diagram while performing, so he wanted to this person. It's just that Rian once said she had the worst personality in the mansion, so when he replied, Chiron looked very hesitant. No, my lady? Then let me teach you. Come here. Raina actively moved to the side, leaving a space on her seat for Chiron. But he really didn't dare to sit there. What's wrong with these Ogent siblings? Chiron thought to himself. I can't be careless. She's an expert at using the force diagram when performing. He replied awkwardly. It's okay. Although he said it was okay, his heart was in turmoil. Rian also said that in this mansion, the pickiest person was his sister. She looked at him and smiled gently. Then I'll teach you. Will you sit down here? After saying that, she placed one hand on the piano keys and patted the spot next to her with the other. He was shocked by her invitation, and sweat began to form on his forehead. He kept getting nervous, and his heart began to cry out. What, sit there? Raina also noticed his tense expression and calmly reassured him. It's okay. I've given permission, so no one will blame you. He pursed his lips, hesitating. His inner self was struggling. She insists, and I have no right to refuse. Reluctantly, he sat down, feeling both tense and excited. His heart was also racing. He told himself, besides, I won't have another chance to sit in front of a piano. He sat seriously and listened to her explain the basics of music. She enthusiastically and patiently taught him each note. Now there are the notes C, D, E, and these symbols in the sheet music. She asked him to try pressing all 3 keys down at the same time. He quickly followed her instructions. His 3 fingers gently pressed down together. A sound rang out, making him a little confused. The soaring, clear sound moved his heart. He exclaimed, "What a beautiful sound." She turned to look at him, surprised. That's a good start. His mood at this moment was indescribably mixed. He was embarrassed. His eyes couldn't hide his awkwardness. Sorry if I'm asking for too much, but can I try to play? She was very surprised by his request, but she didn't think for long before agreeing. Of course. Chiron bowed his head, realizing his behavior was a bit rude. The request just now seemed a bit excessive, and he felt that it wasn't a good idea. Maybe it's not a good idea. Raina smiled gently and said to him, "That's how everyone starts." However, deep in her mind, a question arose. Does he know more about music theory than what I just taught him? Chiron placed both hands on the piano keyboard, gently touching the keys. He began to move his fingers lightly and flexibly, pressing and holding the black and white keys. The clear and enchanting sounds from the notes rang out one after another. Raina was so surprised that she covered her mouth, her eyes staring at his hands. She admired him, unable to believe it. He's playing it all wrong. But there's no hesitation when he presses the keys. Should I stop him? Raina broke into a sweat, watching Chiron play, a thought flashing through her mind. She focused on the music he was playing, her face no longer stiff. Strange, he's playing it completely wrong. Although the sound produced was not perfect and a bit messy, she still enjoyed it. But then suddenly, Raina discovered something. Her eyes widened in surprise as she watched his hands move skillfully on the keys. She was shocked to realize, but it's also completely similar. Chiron seemed to melt into the melody of the music. In that moment, she realized that it was as if he could perfectly imitate the feeling of the music she had just played. The synchronicity in each note truly surprised and amazed her. His eyes suddenly glowed with a jade-green light. Chiron seemed to fall into a matrix of notes. He and she sat in the center, the dim light creating a magical and captivating space. Under his skillful hands, the melodies and sounds continued to rise one after another. His hands gracefully glided over the keys, the notes dancing around them with each melody. Chiron's fingers pressing down on the keys became sparkling and prominent, further enhancing his grace and subtlety. At this moment, Raina's eyes narrowed. It seemed he was on the right track. She pondered. It's starting to sound more accurate. His hands kept rising and falling, moving non-stop like a real artist. She sat concentrating on listening and enjoying every melody he painted. Raina stared in amazement at the man in front of her. What was happening? Before her eyes was hard to believe. An indescribable feeling welled up in her heart. What is this? This can't be called a performance, but he has the clairvoyance to feel the most essential things. Raina observed every gesture and action of Chiron. A few questions arose in her mind. Why is this child a butler? Especially since he looks so noble. He saw her contemplative attitude and realized, I'm sorry, Before he could finish his sentence, Rian's scream was heard. Don't be so noisy, you damn gremlin. His scream tore apart the melodious and gentle atmosphere, making Chiron's mood couldn't help but be fearful. Sweat also started to form on his forehead. Rian's attitude was annoyed, his eyes a little angry. He stood at the door of Raina's room, putting his hand inside his shirt and scratching lightly, revealing a six-pack chiseled body. His mouth was still constantly shouting, "When you're home, just rest. Why do you have to act crazy?" Looking into the room apart from her, the person next to her also annoyed him. He looked at him with surprise and confusion. Hey, you're here too. Chiron met Rian in this awkward situation. Chiron's expression was a little shy and embarrassed. He awkwardly replied, Yes, that's right. Raina, sitting next to him, was also stunned, not understanding the situation. She was very surprised. You two know each other. While Rian stood frozen, Chiron looked from him to her, his expression shy. He stammered, No, well. He didn't know how to answer the question. He broke into a cold sweat, a sense of unease rising in his heart. Will my friendship with Rian be exposed? Why do I feel like I've committed a crime? Behind him, Rian was scratching himself and said casually, Oh, Chiron. He was now fully awake. His eyes lit up as he introduced Chiron to Raina. He's my friend. He was like a deer in headlights, scared and fell to the floor, his eyes wide with horror looking at him. What did you say, Rian? In his heart, he probably knew that if their friendship was exposed, it wouldn't be good. He smiled brightly, his hands on his hips, facing Rian. Rian reassured him, Don't worry. The three-witch gremlin has a difficult personality, but she doesn't care about those things. Chiron's eyes widened, unable to believe what he had just heard. His heart was in turmoil. What? How could that be? How could she not care? While he was at a loss on how to face her, Raina spoke up first. So your name is Chiron, huh? She squatted down next to him, her attitude gentle and caring. She placed her hand lightly on his shoulder. Don't worry. If Rian says you two are friends, then that's good. The kid is a bit annoying, but he's responsible for his words. Her expression was beyond his imagination. It made him feel a little worried. Raina didn't care whether he and he were friends or not, but what made her more curious was his thoughts. She was curious. So what were you thinking when you were playing? I really want to know. He was scared by her words, and many question marks appeared in his head. He didn't know what she was up to. Rian was also surprised by her question. What Chiron played? I thought you were going crazy in here, witnessing this scene. The logic of 16 years was collapsing. The wall of his concepts shattered in an instant. His heart kept wondering. She doesn't care that her brother is friends with a commoner. Chiron turned to look at him. And Rian, why did you lie? Your sister is a beautiful and kind lady. Hearing his words, she couldn't help but be amused. Contrary to her expression, Rian's face turned pale. He looked serious, his eyes carrying a hint of fear. Don't be fooled by her. She's a witch who knows when she'll follow and devour you. Hearing his words, he couldn't help but be amazed. She leaned close to him, covering her mouth with her hand, and smiled shyly. Sorry, my brother is a bit childish. I'm glad he has you as a friend. Please look after him. He looked at Raina's face and smiled, then replied, It's nothing. Actually, I'm the one who owes you. Her enthusiasm made him embarrassed. Raina praised Chiron endlessly. Oh my, you're so cute. Rian, seeing this, gave a sly, cute smile. So why don't you keep him? By the way, let him join our family. Raina was surprised by Rian's idea. She smiled with great interest. So close that you're not afraid he'll steal your sister. Rian laughed heartily. What are you talking about? You're not the one I'm worried about. It's Chiron. After saying that, a hand grabbed his collar tightly. The two of them started fighting. She didn't hold back at all, not caring that he was her brother, and beat him with all her might. You thought just because I didn't say anything you were so good? The two of them wrestled on the floor. Rian couldn't stand it anymore and cried out, Ouch! Ouch! That hurts! Chiron stood watching the two siblings fight. The chaotic thoughts in his head made him feel lost. Just when he thought he understood more about the nobility, they became even more incomprehensible. After being beaten, Rian snorted coldly, unconvinced, and yelled at her, Humph, why did you come home? You just took a break not long ago. She casually dusted off her hands. Don't you know Rai is preparing for the examination? I came to pick him up. We're leaving tomorrow, and Dad went to visit a friend. He'll be back later. Rian's jaw dropped in surprise. What crazy? The certification exam is a standard and condition for mages and swordsmen to be recognized not only in the kingdom, but throughout the continent. Everywhere, more than 1,000 people participate each year, but no more than 30 people successfully complete it each time. In addition, there is a preliminary certificate. If you graduate from an academy certified by the kingdom like the Alfus Magic Academy, you have a chance to become a 10th rank probationary mage. After receiving achievement points through organizations and guilds, you can be promoted. Hundreds of thousands of people flock here. The line of people stretches so far, you can't see the end. But where there is money, talent, and fame, people will naturally gather. Even with a preliminary certificate, people still want to get the certified one. That's the legendary exam that Rai is preparing to take at the age of 18. Rian was full of admiration. Geniuses are really different. They have the full support of their family, too. He sighed, his mood sinking. Raina walked over to him, ruffling his hair to comfort him. It's okay. I'll go prepare dinner. It's seafood from the royal palace, so I have to prepare it myself. She turned to him and smiled brightly. It was nice meeting you, Chiron. See you next time. He looked at her blankly. Yes. Have a good day. He thought to himself, will I have a chance to see her again? He remembered the scene when she taught him to play the piano. The feeling then was wonderful. He didn't know if he could see her again, because tomorrow he would be leaving the mansion. Raina went out, leaving Chiron and Rian behind. He turned to him and hesitantly started to speak. Rian, your sister? He looked at him, then looked away, his eyes determined. He asked him, does she have a boyfriend? His question made Rian freeze in surprise for a moment. Looking at his expression, Chiron knew he had misspoken. He quickly tried to cover it up. "It's nothing." Rian couldn't stop smiling, his eyes sparkling with amusement. He quickly reacted to his attitude. "I was just curious." Forget that question. But before he could finish, he had already rushed out the door shouting Raina's name. Sister Chiron knew something was about to happen and called after him. "I said it's nothing." He gritted his teeth, his face anxious as he watched Rian about to run out the door. He also quickly chased after him, a sense of urgency filling his heart. He blamed himself for misspeaking because he felt sad. Meanwhile, he ran out at top speed, not forgetting his mission. To shout, Sister Chiron asked. Rian stood on the upper floor holding onto the railing and leaning down to shout, "If you have a boyfriend." Raina was leading the maids to prepare a meal from the royal palace. His shout echoed through the hall. Rian's words rang out once more. "Do you have a boyfriend?" That sentence made everyone turn around in shock to look at him. Chiron from behind covered Rian's mouth with his hand and pulled him back, causing him to make muffled sounds. Above, he kept hugging him tightly and covering his mouth. The muffled sounds made everyone below whisper, "Huh? What's going on? A boyfriend?" Her heart was pounding. Seeing the maids turn to look at her, she could only force a smile to hide her embarrassment. She laughed out loud and said to them, "They're just teasing each other. Don't mind them." Raina and the maids continued to walk. As she walked, she said, "Now that we've finished the detoxification, we need to steam it." They all replied in unison, "Yes, my lady." Behind a nearby wall, the head butler had been standing there for a long time. Everything that had just happened had entered his eyes. He called the person behind him. "Hey, Haynes, does the young master have a guest today?" The man bowed his head. "There are no scheduled plans, head butler." On the upper floor, Rian was about to say more, Chironi. "He said he saw you were about to cause trouble again." He pulled his hand away. The head butler said coldly to the other man, "I've heard that voice before. Now I remember." He turned his face, his eyes as sharp as a knife. He ordered his subordinate, "Tell Timuran to come to my office immediately." He frowned and then yelled immediately. The sky was blue, the forest covered by tall trees. Rian's breathing and training sounds echoed in the air. A shout rang out, "Stop! Take a 10-minute break." He was out of breath, his left hand holding a training stick, his right hand constantly wiping away sweat. Keith looked at him and stroked his beard. He thought about him. He's become more enthusiastic again. It's been about a year, right? Seeing him train enthusiastically, he remembered the last time he lost heart so quickly. He glanced at him and thought deeply. But I'm sure once Rai goes to the royal palace, the boy will change. The problem is mastering the force diagram. Beads of sweat rolled down Rian's face. Suddenly, a desperate cry was heard. "Young master." He jumped and glanced towards the voice. A man in a hat was running towards him in a hurry. His voice echoed from a distance. "Young master, Lady Raina requests you to return to the mansion immediately." He was about to drink from his water bottle when his words made him annoyed. If it's to praise my brother, I'm not interested. Tell her to do whatever she wants." The servant denied it emphatically. "No, my lord. The lady said that Mr. Chiron is in danger. He might die." Hearing this, the water in his mouth immediately sprayed out. Rian stood up with the water bottle, looking at the servant with an impatient and worried attitude. Why, I thought he was going home today." The servant, having run too fast, was now bent over panting. "The head butler has reported to the head of the family. I'm not sure, but the young lady said it's because of his relationship with you." Rian hurriedly took his coat and put it on carelessly. He impatiently turned back to say to Keith Master, "I have to go see my father." The old man saw his appearance and knew something was wrong. He pressed, "What's wrong?" He was a bit flustered. "A butler named Chiron is my friend, and somehow my father found out." Not much time was left. He was on pins and needles telling the old man, "I'm sure my father will forgive him if I persuade him. I'll practice later." As soon as he finished speaking, the old man interrupted him. "You can't." He stopped, stood up straight, and looked at the old man. He couldn't believe his ears, and asked again, "What?" The old man took the sword and stood in front of Rian. He exclaimed, "Master." The magnificent mansion lay before him, the mountains vast and wide. In the main hall of the mansion, Chironi was kneeling. Male and female servants stood in lines on both sides. On the chair in the middle sat the head of the Bischoff family. On both sides were Lady Raina and young Master Rai. Behind was the head butler. He knelt on the ground. his heart like ants crawling on a hot pan. The man's majestic voice echoed with power, Chiron Arian. Bischoff exuded a noble and elegant air. He held a report in his hand and looked at him with anger. You will be executed. The entire grand hall of the mansion was shaken. People whispered incessantly. How could this happen? The female servants couldn't help but worry and be afraid. One female servant leaned close to another's ear and whispered, How dare a commoner do that to a noble? The whispers grew more and more. Another person thought he didn't know what was good for him. No matter how ignorant he is, he should know these rules. Every word of evaluation and judgment was heard by Timurin. He only glanced at the female servants without saying anything. The three people sat on the long bench. Bischoff held the document in his hand. He was very focused on it. Rai, sitting next to him, was a bit arrogant and didn't seem to care. Only Raina was anxious. She was like sitting on pins and needles. There were many things she wanted to say to her father. She couldn't hold it in anymore. Raina spoke up, her attitude worried and urgent. Father, wait. I have something to say. He flipped through the documents in his hand and asked her back. What else do you need to say? The stack of documents in his hand was carefully examined. On the document provided by the head butler, a series of servants stood in a neat line, all trembling with fear. Mr. Bischoff used a stack of documents to accuse him. The testimony of many servants confirmed that this boy had acted very carelessly in front of Rian. He turned to Raina and questioned her. You've read the contract details, so you shouldn't have any objections. Is there anything else you want to say? Chiron at this time lowered his head, hesitating a little, but then the words came out. I want to ask something. He looked up at him, his eyes fearful. If I and the young master are friends, what will happen to the young master? All the servants were terrified. They all thought he was done for this time. This guy doesn't even understand his current situation. He should be begging for his life. He was angry. You dare to ask me that question? Raina looked at her father, and then at him. In such a life or death situation, he still had the courage to ask about Rian. She wondered to herself, is he worried about Rian, even though he was in this situation? He flew into a rage and did not hesitate to scold him. You're just a foolish commoner. You think if you play around with someone like you, a noble will be affected. Chiron bowed his head, sighed, and then smiled. He looked up straight at him and boldly admitted, It's true that Rin and I are friends. Under the watchful eyes of everyone, he once again confessed. We've been friends for a year, and I'll declare it now, and we'll always be friends. The servants were terrified when they heard these words from his own mouth. They were scared and exclaimed, This guy. His eyes flashed with a murderous glint. The servants were also curious. Why aren't you afraid? He used a contemptuous tone to warn him. Yes, it seems you underestimate the name Ogent. Bischoff lost his temper and shouted, Head butler, deal with him quickly. Don't let news of this get out. He handed the stack of documents to the head butler. He bowed his head respectfully and took the stack of documents from his hand. 2 soldiers came forward, each taking one of his arms to take him out for punishment. Raina screamed to stop him. Father, wait, please listen to me. She bowed her face, showing unconcealed worry and fear for her distraught father. Seeing her trying to obstruct his decision, he turned to her and unleashed his wrath. He confessed, and I have made my decision. As a family head, once I have made a decision, I will not take it back. The servants were like sitting on pins and needles. Everyone worried for their small lives. The blonde-haired man felt it was unfair and turned to say to the head butler, Head butler, isn't this a bit too much? The fat man next to him also couldn't bear it and decided to speak up to protect himself. There's no reason for all of us to die for one person. The blonde-haired man heard this, and his face turned black with fear, looking at the man next to him. He grimaced and said, This family is our life to protect it. We must eliminate all conflicts that arise, no matter how small. When Chiron was led away by the 2 men, he looked on and said with a hidden meaning, Now you'll see it's wrong, but later you'll be grateful for this choice. Suddenly, the door opened. A shout echoed through the grand hall of the mansion. I won't let that happen. Rian appeared with a hurried and urgent look. In his hand he held his master's sword. Raina was overjoyed, her face showing unconcealed joy. Finally, you're back. Her suspended heart was finally put down. She shouted Rian. Contrary to her expectation, Bischoff's face darkened. He crossed his arms, his expression stern with no hint of joy as he looked at his son. Chiron looked up at him, but in his eyes was not the expectation like Raina's, but an expression of resignation awaiting any punishment. Perhaps he was afraid of implicating him. With impatience and anger, Rian shouted uncontrollably, "Who dares to kill my friend without my permission?" He coldly and decisively looked at him. He said indifferently, "Me." Just one sentence he said was enough to show his authority and status in this family. Rian below used all his words to defend him. He couldn't understand why, just because he made friends with him, he had to suffer such a bitter end, exchanging his life for their friendship. He questioned him. Why he didn't make any fatal mistake. He just made friends with me. Raina stood up anxiously. She couldn't help but worry for him and her younger brother. Seeing his son dare to question him for a commoner, he considered human life to be very cheap. You don't have to make a fatal mistake to deserve death. Matters involving nobles are very complicated. You can't even imagine. Rian defiantly shouted in anger. His words were sharp and firm. Our family is dealing with this complicated situation, and you are also enjoying the privilege of a noble's son. If that privilege forces me to kill my friend, then I don't need it. Bischoff looked at him with his domineering eyes. He imposed his opinions on others, his words full of class division. You're just a child. You ask why he has to die. Making friends with a noble means that relationship must be equal. He was being escorted by 2 soldiers, his eyes indifferent, and his clear declaration earlier made him even more irritated. Seeing him, he didn't think twice and said insulting and contemptuous words. Do you really think that commoner considers you a friend? On what basis? In this world, there are many people who want to take advantage of nobles, Rian shouted vehemently, opposing his father's arrogant words. Chiron would never do that. He looked at him with half an eye, his words gradually losing patience with him. Why should I believe you prove that you and Chiron are really friends? His words stunned him on the spot. He was dumbfounded. Prove it. His heart was in turmoil. He was startled. I'm done for. Raina, standing beside him, also couldn't have expected her father to ask about this. She looked at him nervously. He was staring at him. He smirked, his eyes full of triumph. His thoughts at this moment were in a mess. If I say I can't prove it, then everything is over. He was pressured by his question. After hesitating for a while, he finally said, My feelings. He asked himself, can human feelings be proven? He fell into a confused state of thought, but I feel like I can't just speak carelessly. He tried to put himself in his shoes. If I were Chiron, I could have easily defeated him. Suddenly an idea popped into his head. If I were Chiron. He glanced at him, looking at his carefree, comfortable face without a trace of worry or fear, but his eyes were resolute and strong. Looking at him, he fell into deep thought again. That gaze, it seems to be taking everything in. A gaze like when he dueled with me. Rian looked straight into those eyes. He seemed to be guided by him, remembering every word he had said before. Sometimes not focusing on small issues will bring better results. He followed the stream of memories back to when they played cards together. When his cards were not what he wanted, he propped his head on his hand, looking bored and uninterested, while in his hand was the ace of spades. He guided him. Don't focus on the small parts of your opponent, but instead look at the whole. He doubted his words. Look at the whole. Chiron flipped the ace of spades and showed it to him. That way you can see their true purpose. He silently memorized it in his head. Rian, as if given a boost of courage. Look at the whole. Look at the whole. The person standing right in front of him now, his father, was a second-class noble, the head of the Ogent family of the black-haired lineage, a 4th-level certified Grand Minister, a knight. He clenched the sword his master had given him, silently affirming in his heart, yes, this is not like a quarrel between father and son, but a sword fight. Back to 30 minutes ago, when he received the news and was about to leave, but was stopped by his master. He shouted at the old man, Master, why aren't you letting me go? My friend, he might die. The old man ignored his eagerness and remained calm and composed. Yes, you're talking about the kid who works in the library, right? Keith hesitated and then continued. But that kid is a commoner. He was stunned and speechless when he heard the old man say these words. "Master, I didn't know you were that kind of person. You taught me, Master." He couldn't believe that the person he had always respected so much had the same domineering and old-fashioned thoughts as his father. At this moment his mood truly collapsed. He lost control and screamed out his feelings. "If swinging a sword can solve things, then anyone can be my friend." Keith calmly looked at his student. He began to explain to him, "Rian, don't you know what is most important for a noble? Isn't it natural for nobles to eliminate anything that threatens their family's status?" The old man explained to him the disadvantages for his family. "Have you ever thought about the weight your friend carries when his value is only equivalent to that of a fly?" After befriending him without thinking it through. After he heard these words from the old man, he gritted his teeth and choked up his shoulders, trembling. Tears uncontrollably rolled down his cheeks. Each tear that fell seemed to prove his helplessness and pain. Keith advised him, his voice low and warm but full of determination. "Don't even think about solving this problem by arguing." Rian clenched his fists, his fingers tightening. He said to the old man, his voice full of determination, but also showing his helplessness, "But I can't just stand here and do nothing. I was the one who offered to be friends with him first." Rian raised his hand, his eyes burning with a high degree of determination, and shouted loudly at the old man, "I don't want to be a coward." His words at this moment were like challenging fate. His determination was evident in every gesture, every look. Keith looked at him with a different gaze. He secretly admired him. Good determination. The boy is very emotional, honest, and pure. But that's not how you become a great swordsman. I have high hopes for you, and I will cheer you on. Keith handed his sword to him and gave it to him. "Take it." Fortunately, the old man was not the kind of old-fashioned person with class prejudice. He also warned and cautioned him, "I'll let you go if you bring this back with you. But if you're not even mentally prepared for this, don't dream of taking a single step out of here." He took the sword from his master, his eyes staring at it. His eyes reflected his determination and seriousness. Rian himself now had to make a choice that was true to his own beliefs. His eyes lit up. It carried his confidence and unwavering determination. "Master, I will never forget this favor." Every word he said was like a vow, carved deep into his heart and mind, becoming the driving force for him to move forward and face this challenge. The old man glanced at him. "Remember, abandoning a friend is like abandoning a part of your own body." The words were like a reminder and a warning to him. His heart was now like a raging wave. "This is a sword fight, a trade for my own life." Back to the present, in front of the mansion's grand hall, realizing the truth his master had taught him, Rian held the sword and laughed loudly. The laughter echoed throughout the mansion, giving others goosebumps. "You're right, father, I was almost defeated by you." He roared in indignation. "Proving we are friends, I believe it's enough because I believe that I and Chiron are friends." He also added that the existence of his friend Chiron was proof of their friendship. Bischoff was furious at these sharp rebuttals. He gritted his teeth and hissed, "How absurd, this is not a father-son argument." He shouted angrily. Even now, the reputation of countless families is collapsing. His words shocked the servants. He kept shouting crazy words. "If I can avoid the decline of the family, I would even be willing to sever ties with my own son." As soon as the words were spoken, she and a group of female servants were shocked. Raina had to scream, "Father." His 2 feet stepped into a very serious posture, his voice firm and without a hint of hesitation. "If I have to do that in exchange for my friend's life." He bowed his right hand on his chest. He used the most solemn and respectful posture to express his attitude. "Then I will gladly leave." Everyone was scared by his action. Bischoff was so angry he stood up abruptly, his hands clenched, veins popping out clearly. He just roared at him. "This brat, raise your sword. If you really think this brat is your friend, then bet your life right here." He drew his sword without a moment's hesitation. The sharp sound of the sword rang out as if to say that his father-son relationship was also about to end. He couldn't believe his eyes. His son drew his sword to fight him for a commoner. He looked at him and said haltingly, You even drew your sword to oppose your father." He held the sword in front of him, the tip pointing to the sky, his eyes flashing with a sharp glint. "I am not pointing my sword at you, father. I am just showing my faith." Bischoff at this time clutched his chest, trying to look helpless. "How can you have friends? You can't even get along with other families, maybe because you can't reach the level of other nobles. He wanted to manipulate Ryan's psychology again. Now you're just keeping someone weaker than you to comfort yourself. But no. He lowered his voice. This time you're wrong, father. His eyes were like fire, firm and unshakable. His eyes carried both confidence and faith in himself. He lowered his sword and said to him with certainty, Chiron is a friend, and he is better than me. I want to help Chiron so he can shine brightly in a higher position. His determination also amazed him. Bischoff was so angry, he turned into a fury and pointed at him, his voice full of indignation as he questioned, Did you deceive the boy? Did you convince him that a commoner can be friends with a noble? His words were like a sharp knife stabbing into Chiron's self-esteem. He denied it. No. Rian also stood up to shield him, his voice full of protectiveness and defense. Chiron, stay still. I will protect you. Chiron knew that this was a decisive moment, not only for himself, but also for the friendship he cherished. He called him by his name. Rian, hearing his call, he was stunned. He spoke up, taking all the blame on himself. You don't need to take responsibility for everything. I will take responsibility for my part. He was surprised and turned his head to look at him. Chiron remembered the moment his hand reached out and took his. From the moment you wanted to be friends with me, I had a feeling that I would have to stand at a crossroads to choose whether I should be friends with you or save my own life. His eyes were filled with gratitude. He looked at him. Even if it means I have to die here, I don't regret being friends with you. Rian lowered his head, his eyes filled with tears. His sincere friendship did not disappoint him at all. His voice was choked with emotion. Yes, suddenly, he raised his face and shouted at Bischoff, That's what I mean! The words echoed like a powerful affirmation of their friendship and unwavering determination. His heart was filled with faith and will, knowing that he had made the right decision. Rian shouted, reaffirming his friendship with him, Even if I am isolated, we are still friends. The bold and sharp words made him speechless. He could only grimace and look at him. Raina, standing on the side, was also moved to tears by these sincere words. She fell into thought. Even though we are immature, we are still human beings with emotions. A true friend does not turn their back on us. The servants were also moved, everyone shedding tears. Everyone has a friend like that. Those barriers make them forever lose their own equality. The head butler also glanced at Rian and Chiron. He frowned and clicked his tongue. Suddenly a hearty laugh echoed throughout the mansion. How interesting. Everyone below looked up in surprise. Raina was overjoyed and called out Grandpa. Clump stood on the upper floor looking down. He was full of vitality, enjoying the scene and praising it. I didn't think I'd get to witness such a moving scene now that I'm so old. Youth is truly the best. Raina was overjoyed. Her heart couldn't help but sigh in relief. Everything is fine. If it's Grandpa, she thought things might be handled more easily if my grandfather intervenes. But contrary to her attitude, Bischoff's expression was not very natural. He looked at Clump doubtfully. Father, you're here. Raina told me it would be a few more days. He spoke up. I came early because my friend ran away with a young lady. After saying that, he sat down on the chair. Chiron was also very surprised by his appearance. He looked at him blankly, unconsciously realizing his identity. That person is the general of Tomia and a third-level swordsman, Ryan's grandfather. He sat with his legs crossed comfortably, his voice full of excitement. Anyway, this place is as noisy as ever. Youth is truly great. He was the former family head Clump. While he was laughing and talking with everyone, the current family head, his son, did not look happy at all. He had a sad look on his face and said to him, In this situation, it's not that great. Our family's image has collapsed. He didn't even pay attention to his son's appearance, excitedly looking at the people in the grand hall. Don't be so quick to jump to conclusions. I've been standing behind and watching for a while, and it's clear that everyone here has a lot to say. So first, why don't we listen to each other's opinions and see if we've lost face? He accepted the opinion of the first-person witness number 1, the eldest daughter, Raina Ogent. She was overjoyed to be able to express her thoughts on him. Although yesterday was the first time I met Chiron, I could already tell that he is a very intelligent and talented young man. She stood presenting like a speaker. Everyone there was completely focused on her, listening intently to her assessment of him. He crossed his legs, his hand propping up his chin, his expression expectant as his granddaughter gave her opinion. Furthermore, Chiron has completed all the requirements in the contract and was supposed to leave the family today. Considering such circumstances, it's hard to say that Chiron approached Rian with any specific malicious intent, and as a result, I don't believe his actions have tarnished the family's honor. He stroked his chin as if he understood her meaning. He snorted coldly. So if that's the case, what do you think, my second grandson? The next person to give their opinion was witness number 2, the second son, Zosen. Earlier, although he didn't speak up, his expression showed no sympathy for him at all. He frowned, his words hissed through his teeth. I don't like that kid. Bischoff next to him was very pleased with this answer. He smiled triumphantly, secretly praising this second son of his. Yes, I know I can trust you, Rai. But he had never paid attention to or cared about things that didn't concern him. However, this has nothing to do with me. His ambiguous words surprised and disappointed him a little. He exclaimed, What? Bischoff's face darkened, turning to his indecisive son, his tone somewhat reproachful. What do you mean? You said you don't like him, and then you say you don't care. He crossed his arms in front of his chest, leaning back in his chair. His eyes slightly closed, his expression indifferent as he spoke. That's right. I don't like the kid, but who Rian befriends has nothing to do with me. He added bluntly, I simply want this to be over so we can depart for the royal palace. Raina was also very surprised by Rai's attitude. Her eyes lit up with admiration. Wow, my little brother's attitude. He laughed loudly. This grandson's opinion. This is exactly why there's no place like home. He stroked his chin and looked towards Rian. So to conclude, let's hear the opinion of the one who has probably observed the child, Chiron, for the longest time. He called the next person the deputy butler. The next person was witness number 3, Deputy Butler Tamura. He cleared his throat. But then his attention fell on the head butler. He was holding his hand up near his chin and signaling to him. In his heart, he thought, I'm sure he's aware. Looking at Bischoff's attitude, his eyes were also glancing at the deputy butler. His thoughts were too clear to signal to him. We are not the ones who express opinions, but the ones who obey our master's will. The deputy butler finally managed to say his name, Chiron. He glanced at the head butler and then expressed his true feelings about him. He did the work I assigned him, and he completed it very well. Moreover, he finished the work a full 6 months ahead of schedule. His words were like a thunderclap to the head butler. He couldn't believe he didn't follow his instructions. He gritted his teeth. What the hell does he think he's doing? Bischoff sat there sighing, his majestic demeanor gradually fading. Clumpf looked at the deputy butler and asked him, Did you know those two were friends? He placed his hand on his chest and respectfully answered the master's question. I knew he often went out with the young master, but I didn't know they were friends. But in my opinion, if he were a disobedient child, he wouldn't have been able to sort 10,000 books. He froze, unable to believe his ears. He never expected that in the mansion. Besides Rian, his friend and the kind Miss Raina, there would be someone who would stand up for him and speak well of him. That was the deputy butler. Rian glanced at him with a smile. Finally, someone stood up to acknowledge his efforts and abilities. Raina put her hand on her chin, secretly happy for him. Good. The atmosphere has completely changed. But that joy was extinguished when she looked at her father. His gaze towards him had not changed at all. He frowned, annoyed that time and time again someone would speak up for him, especially since Mr. Clumpf returned. Everything was not under his control. She also knew that the only one who wanted to punish Chiron was her father. Suddenly, a deep, powerful voice rang out. No! He stood up firm in his words. I cannot agree to this. As soon as his words were spoken, Raina and Mr. Bischoff both spoke up at the same time. Father Grandpa Raina didn't understand why he changed his mind at the last minute. She had just relaxed, and now she was on pins and needles. He, on the other hand, was more radiant. Mr. Clumpf quickly corrected himself. No, I understand they consider each other friends. Chiron and Rian stood before him, worried and tense. He looked at the two of them and pondered. However, let's stop here. If this relationship continues, Rumors will eventually spread, and this could become a weakness for our political rivals to seize upon and use against us. He listened to his father speak and became more attentive. All his worries were clearly stated by Mr. Clump Rye, sitting next to him, still paid no attention to anything, his expression indifferent. He began to state his opinion. All the people in our family are outstanding individuals of the kingdom. Rye is even preparing to take the certification exam. Moreover, what can I do when so many families depend on me like this? The maids stood neatly hearing his words, and couldn't help but worry about their own and their families' fates. Because they were commoners, working for the nobility was already a great honor. Chiron, you are an intelligent child. I believe you will understand. Raina turned to look at him, wanting to say something, but the words got stuck in her throat. But Rian also couldn't sit still and watch anymore. He gritted his teeth, his eyes staring at him resolute and unbound. He opened his mouth to say something, but his grandfather cut him off. He smiled wryly at his beloved grandson. He couldn't help but think, I see you have a lot of potential and are intelligent, Rian. But why don't you understand what I'm saying? In his heart, he was also very confused. He wanted him to understand his responsibilities. You also know how heavy it is to carry the lives of countless people. He then turned to look at him, wanting to know his feelings and what Rian had realized after befriending him. What do you think, Chiron? I want to thank you for teaching my naive grandson what true friendship is. He didn't want this family to be condemned because of him. He asked for his opinion. But can we end it here? Chiron just bowed his head. He closed his eyes, not answering him for a long time. Then he suddenly blurted out 2 words, I can't. This made both Mr. Clump and Raina gasp. Mr. Bischoff also couldn't believe he could be so stubborn and not know how to distinguish between important and trivial matters. Rye, who never cared about anything, now had to look at him with a different gaze. Rian was also very surprised by his answer. He thought he would beg for forgiveness and cut off his friendship with him for his own life. He also couldn't have expected him to be so brave. He hesitated, wanting to call his name. He looked at Chiron, sincere and straightforward, and couldn't help but call his name without hesitation. Chiron. He placed his hand on his chest, looked at him, and spoke from the bottom of his heart. If I am a hindrance to Rian, I don't mind never seeing him again. However, he was no longer hesitant or afraid. He frankly expressed all his feelings. That doesn't mean I can't consider him a friend. He asserted confidently and surely, Rian and I are friends. He couldn't let his friendship be bound by others or be tainted by anyone's words. He said to Mr. Clump, as long as you consider those things, I will follow any order you give. Rian's hand, holding the sword, was trembling. He felt so ashamed. His tears fell once again because of this. In his heart, he was also blaming himself. I even felt relieved that Chiron didn't have to die. To be honest, a part of me felt that way. But Chiron knew that abandoning a friend was equivalent to abandoning a part of himself. Rian's eyes widened as he looked at him. The words his master taught him during practice, he had a hard time deciding. As for him, he would rather lose his own life to preserve the 2 words, friendship. He felt extremely ashamed. He made up his mind. All right, anyway, this is not for negotiation. He pointed his sword straight up to the sky, roaring loudly and decisively. The roar was like a thunderclap. Here I declare. Mr. Clump and Raina were immediately frightened by his next action. She yelled, don't do it. I don't know what you're planning, but don't. She reacted like that because she didn't know if her brother would make a mature decision. If there was even a small mistake, his fate and that of the entire family would be greatly affected. She couldn't let him act so impulsively. His sword plunged straight into the ground. The sound of it hitting the ground was deafening. He knelt down and plunged the sword deep into the tile floor to Chiron's astonishment. He declared bluntly in front of everyone, Rian Ogent, 3rd son of the Ogent family, from this moment on will become Chiron's sword. His oath was like a thunderclap in the tense and suffocating space, making his father so angry he trembled. He gritted his teeth, his face contorted in an ugly way. He roared, what, you damn brat? The entire mansion seemed to shake under the power of his wrath. His roar echoed through every nook and cranny. The origin of the Knight's Oath dates back to the founding of the Kingdom of Tomia. In a chaotic period, large and small nations were all fighting for colonies atopy. The strongest among them succeeded in unifying them all and declared the establishment of the Kingdom of Tomia. However, the newly established kingdom had to stand up against its powerful neighboring countries. So instead of being purged in the unification of the kingdom, the defeated kings were allowed to directly rule their own territories. And in the process, the Knight's Oath was created. The defeated kings would have to kneel before the new king. They swore to become the sword that only their master could wield. In return, they were granted noble status. That is the origin of the Knight's Oath, and also the birth of the nobility. Therefore, breaking the Knight's Oath means that person will become more despicable than a rabid dog. Rian turned to look at everyone and smiled mischievously. What do you all think? Now I can't take it back, can I? Everyone was stunned on the spot. Everyone's jaw dropped at his unexpected decision. He still held the sword tightly in his hand, one leg propped up, one leg kneeling. At this moment, he couldn't help but blame himself. Master, it seems I've caused a huge disaster this time. Rian also thought of the scene of his master getting angry and scolding him. I didn't give you the sword for you to do this. Chiron knelt down beside him. He took his hand. He was scared. Rian, what the hell are you doing? He didn't answer, but glanced at everyone. Mr. Clump's voice rang out, his face stern, his features even more resolute. Rian, if I am truly witnessing you say you will become his sword, then that boy must be worthy. Right. Answer me. He helped him stand up. They both looked at him. He continued to ask, is he really that talented? Or is he only talented in your eyes because you yourself are a useless person? Hearing this, he also relaxed a little. He smiled confidently. He placed his hand on his chest and shouted, a sword does not judge, it only protects. Everyone's face darkened when they heard his answer. Even Chiron was surprised. Suddenly, a long laugh broke out in the tense space. He placed his hand on his face and laughed so heartily that his body shook. He also had to admit that his words were right. Yes, immature brats at least have to go this far to reach the top right. While his father was slapping his forehead in helplessness, his grandfather was endlessly praising him. You have a good mouth, but with that mediocre swordsmanship of yours, I feel sorry for your friend for having to accept a sword like that. Rian couldn't believe his words. He could only stammer, Grandpa, Grandpa. He placed his hand on Chiron's shoulder. He laughed and comforted and reminded him, enough, it's all over. Even though the boy is not the sharpest sword yet, Chiron, he will never betray you. Take good care of my grandson. He patted his shoulder. He closed his eyes, feeling this moment. He looked at him with eyes full of gratitude. Thank you for acknowledging me. He pointed at the head butler and ordered him, the two have sworn to be friends for life, so I can't let you go like this. Head butler used the carriage that Chiron was supposed to use to go home and bring his parents here. He quickly received the order from him. Yes, I'll go right now. The two servants looked at each other and smiled. They both put on their hats. The head butler was still in shock. In his heart, he screamed. Really? Looking up at the blue sky, the clouds floating leisurely, he was helpless even in his thoughts. I never know what the hell the nobles are thinking. Rian finally relaxed his mood. He laughed comfortably, unable to help but exclaim, so refreshing. He lay down on the bed, his arms outstretched. He also sat down next to him. He laughed and asked him, did you see my family's expression? It was great. He felt extremely guilty in his heart. Rian the Knight's Oath, you didn't have to do that for me. He sat up abruptly, making him a little startled. Chiron, I didn't do it because you are my friend. His eyes looked straight at him, his determination burning in them. I'm different from my brother. He has the power to attract people. I simply chose to bet my life on someone like that. He was a little shy and blushed. What? Currently. He was a little embarrassed. He thought to himself, why did you suddenly say that? He looked at him and exclaimed, I feel so pressured. He blushed and said to him, But if you want to protect me, you'll have to practice much harder. His words made him so angry, he coughed up blood. Seeing this, he worriedly asked, What's wrong? He wilted. It's nothing. It's just that you hit a sore spot in my heart. Raina suddenly opened the door and entered. She said loudly, Rian, did you really swear the Knight's Oath to become Chiron's sword? Stepping inside, she saw him collapsed in a pool of blood. She asked about the situation. What's wrong with him? He used the last of his strength to say to her, "Get out." Chiron won't budge. What are you talking about? Just a moment ago, your sister helped a lot. He invited her in. Please come in. She was arrogant. Yes, I bring important information from the opposition. He sobered up immediately, his mood carrying a hint of worry. What's wrong? What are Dad and Grandpa doing? She gently sat down on the bed and told the two of them. They are indeed bloodthirsty, but in the end you also played the Knight's Oath card. They are planning what to do next. So anyway, she told him some very important news. Dad is thinking of enrolling you and Chiron in the Chiron Sword Academy. Chiron, you said his swordsmanship talent is terrifying, right? You said it yourself. He was confused, but to that extent she smiled. Of course. Now that he has become a member of the family, I have told them all about his talent to see if they might be willing to invest something in him. They want his talent to be able to help Rian. Surely for Ryan's future, they want to help him succeed. Hearing that he shouted at her, without my permission, who dares to send me to school? It was so hard for me to finally play with Chiron as I pleased. She didn't say another word, kicking him to the ground and stepping on him. She sighed and then yelled at him without any mercy. You blockhead, you've caused so much chaos and you still want to do what you're not going to listen to me? He was unconvinced and cried out. He turned his head and looked at her with eyes as sharp as a knife. He shouted at her. And anyway, Chiron isn't even going to a sword academy. Chiron will be a mage in the future. He has already opened the spiritual realm. She was surprised and looked at him with suspicion. What? The spiritual realm. Chiron has opened it. Wait, does that mean you swore the Knight's Oath to a future mage? She looked at him, somewhat disbelieving her own ears. He was angry and recklessly yelled, Uselessness has its limits. Get out of here, old woman. Thinking of Chiron and Rian dueling, Raina spoke up. So you used synesthesia to sense the spiritual world and read Ryan's movements to win. She rubbed her chin and exclaimed, That's a good idea, because the energy of his spiritual world is quite high. This should be possible, Chiron replied awkwardly. Is that so? Raina praised him endlessly. You're amazing. According to what I learned at school, the more condensed the energy, the more solid the spiritual world, and being able to maintain that density while using a sword is extremely amazing. Hearing those words, his cheeks turned red. He gently rubbed his head. Raina and Rian shared the same thought. He's embarrassed just from that. She said, I'll tell Grandpa about Chiron's path. Of course, the condition for you to be admitted to the Sword Academy will also be included. Rian, hearing that, jumped up and shouted, What then? What will happen to my master? Raina replied, Master Keith already knows about this, so yesterday he terminated the contract. Tomorrow morning will be when he says goodbye. He was even more surprised. Rian held his sword tightly in his hand, his mind a little sad. He silently remembered his master. That man was about to leave this land. A butler opened the door and announced, Mr. Chiron, your family has arrived and is waiting in the living room. The family head said you can go see them first if you wish. Raina gently turned to ask his opinion. What do you think, Chiron? At first he just smiled, but then he couldn't hide his emotions anymore, extremely happy, and stood up abruptly, exclaiming, I'll go. Chiron ran quickly down the stairs, making the two butlers also worry. The stairs, be careful on the stairs. Chiron was a little embarrassed and said, You can talk to me as you did before. Suddenly, like this is a bit. They were flustered and replied in a flurry, For God's sake, no. Please don't say that, we'll be gone. He smiled reassuringly. Don't worry, I won't tell anyone. They still insisted on refusing. Even so, it's not allowed. After a few short minutes, they all arrived in front of the reception room door. Chiron was in a great hurry, pushing the door open to look inside where his most beloved family members were. Seeing the two people inside, he shouted, Mom, Dad! They were also extremely moved and called his name in unison. Chiron. He seemed to abandon everything and rushed over like a little bird finding its nest, finally burying himself in the warmth of his parents' arms. The three of them hugged each other tightly in overflowing happiness. Chiron looked at his family, feeling sad in his heart. They've lost weight. They must have had a hard time tossing and turning day after day worrying about me. Chiron's mother cried and reassured him. Don't worry, Mom and Dad are fine. Vincent wondered. But why did you suddenly call us? If you finished your work, you should have come home. He suddenly became agitated and asked insistently, "Didn't they force you to stay and not let you go back?" He explained. "No, it's just that I was given a pretty good opportunity." He didn't understand anything. Chiron's mother was also hesitant. "A good opportunity," he replied, and then in one breath, he recounted the entire content and development of the issue to his family. After they heard it, they were all stunned. Everyone's face was pale and stiff. Vincent's eyes were wide open, his whole body motionless, staring at his son. Then he forced a smile and said, "So you mean you became friends with a young noble master while working in the library, and that young master swore a knight's oath to you and you were allowed to be friends with him?" Chiron replied calmly. "Yes, that's right." He suddenly lowered his voice. "Chiron, tell Dad the truth." Then he grabbed both of his shoulders and shook him, continuously, tears welling up his mouth, shouting, "How can a smart kid like you have such fantasies? Did someone treat you badly?" Right. He was shaken to the point of ascending to heaven, but still managed to say, "No, it's true." He hugged his beloved son tightly, crying his eyes out as if he were about to say goodbye forever. Oh God, people say that those who go to noble houses can't return unscathed. Oh my son, Chiron's mother tried to pull her husband away. Vincent. Suddenly the door opened again. The butler's voice announced, "Young master, the family head has arrived." At this time, 3 people entered. Bischoff spoke first. "It's a pleasure to meet you both. I am the head of this house, Bischoff Ogent." Rian bowed slightly and said, "Hello, I am Chiron's sword." Raina gently introduced herself. "I am the eldest daughter, Raina. I have heard a lot about you both." The 2 of them were shocked by this new development, their faces turning pale. They immediately bowed respectfully and replied, "Hello, we are Chiron's parents. Why would great people like you?" On this side, she was a little curious. "Oh my, haven't you heard from Chiron?" Vincent was panicking, his voice trembling with curiosity. Yes, everything the boy said was a fantasy. Is it true? By the time they sat down at the luxurious banquet table full of delicacies, he still couldn't believe it. Impossible. In the end, Vincent seemed to let his soul wander with the clouds while Chiron's mother was flustered. Honey, so many dishes. Even after they finished the meal, he was still like someone who had fallen from the sky, his mind in a turmoil. What the hell is going on? She on this side had just received a hot cup of tea and gratefully said, "Thank you." Vincent felt the stuffy atmosphere here, his mind as if screaming, "What is happening?" His hand holding the teacup trembled so much he almost dropped it. Even if I don't know what a knight's oath is, there's no way they would treat a small family like this so well. I need to clarify this. Thinking of that, Vincent spoke up. "I'm sorry, I'm very happy that my son is highly regarded by you, but I'm also very worried. A young master of a noble house like Ogent swearing a knight's oath to Chiron, it's unbelievable." Bischoff frowned and said, "To be honest, I'm also a little uncomfortable," he continued. "However, for the Ogent family, which is militaristic like us, the knight's oath is absolute. If we discriminate just because of the difference in status, it will destroy Rian's honor. So from now on, we will use honorifics. Please don't feel uncomfortable, and our family will fully support your son." Clump burst out laughing and said loudly, "It's been a long time since I've seen you say something right." Bischoff was annoyed, "Father. You're too loud," Chiron thought to himself. As a family head who manages and decides all major matters of the family, the words decisive and proud really suit him. Although he only had difficulty deciding to take a commoner under his protection, he quietly turned to Raina, saw her winking at him, and continued to think as he saw Ryan's bright smile. But he's not afraid of anyone. Bischoff at this time returned to a serious expression and said, "If we get straight to the point, I have to say your son is a user of the spiritual world. The spiritual world is not something that can be achieved just through hard work. To put it bluntly, it is a real talent that one is born with." He continued, "From what I know, this young man aims to become a mage, so if he wants to get an unofficial mage certificate as quickly as possible, I'm thinking of the Alfus Magic Academy, one of the 5 most prestigious schools in the country, which would be suitable for him." Bischoff rubbed his chin and said, "I'm not saying he has to go to that school to become a mage, but if he doesn't, it will be a waste of that talent, and I don't encourage that. So he should go to study at the Alfus Academy to fit the Ogent family's standards." Clump reminded him, Consider their understanding a little son. He looked at Vincent's stiff expression and immediately understood what his father was saying. Then he went straight to the point. If your son graduates from a magic school, he will become a mage. Only then did he understand and stood up abruptly. Our son will become a mage. Vincent thought to himself. Magic Academy. He began to tremble, his voice unsteady. Impossible. This is a dream. Right? Our son. Bischoff continued. However, the biggest problem is his status. Vincent started when he heard him say this, presenting the difficulty. The magic school is selective, so they only allow the children of nobles to enroll. So Clumpf continued, there is only one option. Then he seriously said, we will adopt Chiron into the Ogent family. Vincent couldn't believe what he had just heard and just stood there frozen, his mind in a mess. What Clumpf resolutely explained their plan. This is the only option after we had a family meeting. He pushed out a commitment paper. I have a cousin who still has no children. If I add the boy's name to my cousin's family, all problems will be solved. However, we have no intention of taking your son away. It's just on paper. But through this, Chiron will become a noble. Vincent thought to himself, Chiron will become a noble. How lucky for the boy to have such an opportunity. But if I do this, it feels like this child is being taken away. He looked at his son with an awkward expression, wanting to beg him in his mind. Tell me, Chiron, what should I do? Seeing his calm expression, he became even more panicked. Could it be that he has already decided? At this time, he quietly glanced at his father. Why? His hand slowly touching the large hand that had always worked so hard under the sun and rain for him, then squeezed it tightly, making Vincent also feel quite painful. Chiron, with a determined gaze, loudly refused. No way, I am my father's son. I cannot become someone else's adopted son. Hearing his son say that, he was terrified and shouted. Raina, sitting opposite, explained Chiron. This is just a formality. Of course, we will still treat your parents as your biological parents. You will achieve your dream and nothing will change. As soon as she finished speaking, Clumpf continued. Kid, you will become a noble. You don't always get an opportunity like this. Chiron was still very determined and firm, saying, if I have to change my father, I'd rather live as a commoner. Clumpf angrily shouted, commoners cannot enroll in a magic school. He replied decisively, then I won't go to school. He once again struck at his psychology, then you won't become a mage. Bischoff and Raina on this side were very surprised. He once again insisted, then I won't be a mage. That sentence made Chiron's mother and Rian freeze. Clumpf was even more agitated and shouted, Chiron, why are you so stubborn? This world is not that easy. There are things you have to give up to succeed. If you can't do that, then your dream is just a child's game. He replied nonchalantly. Maybe so. This made him feel dizzy. What? Vincent on this side had tears welling up in his originally enthusiastic and vibrant face. The awkwardness and sadness were clearly visible. Chiron spoke. Even if my dream is wonderful, it is something I received from my parents. If my parents are the roots, then my dream is the sweet fruit that receives nourishment from them. He remembered the past full of memories of being side by side with his family. Knowing how to read and getting the opportunity to work at the Ogent house are things I achieved because I have my parents as my foundation. This is just one opportunity I got nothing compared to the countless opportunities my parents gave me. Chiron burst out laughing decisively and said, now you're telling me to deny my roots, which is no different from telling me to die. Thank you very much for your offer, but I only have them as my parents. Everyone in the room froze after hearing him speak. No one said a word to each other. Clumpf was so surprised that his eyes were wide open. In his heart, he said to himself, what is this feeling of guilt? What does this child want to say? Suddenly, at this moment, Vincent bowed down and said loudly, please adopt Chiron. Please, I beg you. He was a little confused. Father Clumpf from afar said, I understand what you mean, but what Chiron wants is important. He ignored what the person next to him wanted to say, just bowed his head, and with difficulty uttered a sentence. Chiron is not my biological son. Chiron's mother, after hearing her husband's words, was shocked. Vincent, what are you saying? He still bowed his head and said, we can't have children. He told them, we got Chiron through an unexpected event. I'm sure you can tell, but he definitely comes from a noble family. The boy is too great. Clumph and Raina on this side were more and more stunned. Vincent continued to express his thoughts. If he becomes the adopted son of a noble family, he will return to where he belongs. So this is not about abandoning his parents or denying his roots. Bischoff on this side thought to himself, is that really so? He looked at their family and understood for himself. I'm sure everyone here has already guessed that Chiron looks completely different from his parents. He gently rubbed his chin, speculating. But those words prove he wants to give up his son. Chiron couldn't listen anymore. He was extremely agitated, grabbing his father's arm tightly and shouting loudly, "Father, what are you doing? How can you say that without telling me first?" He at this time could only avoid his son's gaze. "I'm sorry, but you're grown up now. You should know." Suddenly, Chiron seriously questioned, "Do you really think I don't know?" That sentence shocked Vincent. His mood at this time was heavy and low. He had difficulty uttering, "The reason I didn't ask you, father, is because people only have one father and one mother. I also want that. And now you want me to have 6 fathers and mothers?" He was flustered, scared, and heartbroken to the point of his voice faltering. "Father, I just don't want you to give up your dream because of me." His tears began to fall. Chiron decisively shouted loudly and firmly, "Who's giving up their dream? As long as I try hard, opportunities will come, but," he cried heartbrokenly, looking at his parents and asking, "Have you ever thought about my feelings? Who wants to be abandoned by their parents twice?" Vincent clenched Chiron's hand tightly and trembled. "It's just what I did was all my fault, Chiron. I will never abandon you." After saying that, he hugged his small son tightly in his arms as if afraid of losing him. The tears of a loving father flowed like a stream. Vincent sobbed and begged, "Please forgive this foolish father. You are my everything." They hugged each other tightly, expressing their hearts. The people around them were silent, admiring the sacred and beautiful family affection. Bischoff, witnessing that scene, suddenly realized something. "The things we do for our children can hurt them." Clumph replied, "Being a father and mother is really hard. Didn't you also have a hard time raising your son alone?" Bischoff's eyes were already welling up with tears, his hand trying to hide it so no one would see him crying. He quietly shifted his gaze to his son in front. Rian was also crying. He was moved by the deep affection of Vincent and Chiron. Suddenly, Bischoff said, "I heard that the Alfus Magic Academy has a special consideration category I can help." Clumph was curious. What can this old man do? How can I persuade that stubborn Alfus?" He said, "No, I heard he owes you a favor." Clumph, hearing that, burst out laughing. For someone who follows all the rules, isn't being stubborn the best method?" Bischoff on this side also chuckled. He said, "You also used that method to force me to become the family head." He avoided a little and replied, "It was all for your own good." 3 days later, after Rian went to the Sword Academy, the family head allowed my family to stay at Ogent. My father still felt guilty towards me. I don't know how long he will remember this time. Finally, Rian and I had some free time. We used it to sleep together. He looked very happy and laughed with great amusement, looking at his friend lying next to him. He listened to his stories and also burst out laughing with delight. And then 3 days later, they both had to leave home to go to the academy where they would realize their dreams. Chiron quietly turned his head back to take another look. At that moment, someone was sobbing. It turned out to be Rian, crying his eyes out. He said, "Rian, don't cry." He said painfully, "Why shouldn't I cry? As soon as I get on the carriage, I have to go to the Sword Academy. We really have to part." The more he spoke, the louder he cried. "Why can't I enroll next year like you?" Chiron replied, "I'm not even sure if I'll be considered for the special consideration category. We can still see each other during the holidays. Remember to write every day." Rian suddenly placed his hand on his shoulder and decisively called out his name, Chiron. He used all his strength to shout, "You have to become a mage. I will also become the strongest knight to protect you. I promise you." Before he could finish, he was punched hard in the head by Raina. "Just focus on graduating. I'm most worried about you." Then she turned to say to Chiron, "Chiron, don't worry about anything. Just have fun with your family first. He will definitely help you enroll." He quietly replied, "Okay, and thank you for helping me." He placed his hand on his chest and bowed to express his endless gratitude. Raina smiled and thought to herself, "What a strange child. At first I thought he was just a cute kid, but he's also very considerate, and he can maintain his beliefs in such a scary situation." She suddenly looked at him and then spoke again. "Chiron, Maybe when you graduate. But then she didn't say any more, becoming silent. She thought to herself, what am I thinking? He's a child who is about to live in a completely new environment, a magic academy? Then Raina stepped forward, her hand on his shoulder, and said, no, just do your best. You will definitely become a mage. He replied, please take care of Rian. Then she pulled Rian onto the carriage and turned to wave goodbye to Chiron. He on this side got into the carriage where his parents were already sitting, his mood extremely excited and expectant. The horses started to move. The two carriages ran in opposite directions and gradually separated. He was sitting inside when he suddenly heard a very loud call from outside Chiron. He immediately stuck his head out to see who the owner of the voice was. It turned out to be Rian Ogent. He was shouting at him, when you get to the Magic Academy, you have to surpass them. He heard that and found it so funny he burst out laughing. Then Chiron Arian also shouted back loudly in response, you too. And that was the meeting of those two enthusiastic young men. That would be remembered as the beginning of an event that broke the balance of the entire continent. Below the roadside there was a nest of young birds. The mother bird had just flown back and landed next to it. Then it took off again, flying high above the magnificent castles with solemn architecture. This was the Alfus Magic Academy. A man was placing a teacup down on the table. It was Clump. He tiredly forced a smile and said, you've been thinking for 30 minutes. The answer must be yes, right? Alfus on this side replied, even though we've been good friends for 50 years, I really can't accept your proposal. Clump, hearing that, shouted in dissatisfaction, what did you say? Do you know how much I struggled because of you when we were young? Alfus said, it seems to be quite important, so you had to say such empty words. But the special consideration category is not a back door for nobles. Every year many requests are sent, but this category has its own standards. The more he listened, the more annoyed he became, his face scrunching up as he silently cursed, this cunning old man made me wait 30 minutes for nothing. Then Clump burst out laughing. This time is different. The old man was a little surprised. It's really important then. It's been a long time since I've seen that expression on you. Clump smiled slyly and continued, I didn't say you should accept a useless person. It's the opposite. The boy is a friend of my youngest grandson. He's very good. Do you know what I thought when I met him? He said seriously, I thought I was looking at you when you were young. Alfus, who had just taken a sip of tea, immediately questioned, if he's that talented, why didn't he enroll normally? If so, there must be some problem. Clump, still with that serious attitude, explained, there's a big problem. He's not a noble. Hearing that, the old man exclaimed, making him also jump in surprise, impossible. Then Alfus described Chiron's appearance exactly, a child, with blonde hair and blue eyes. Clump remembered Chiron's previous words. Even if I die, I won't regret being friends with him. He commented, that was my first impression of him. So outspoken. He continued seriously, I once thought he was a smart kid who knew how to manipulate adults. However, after I offered to adopt him, he retorted like this, if you're telling me to deny my origins now, it's no different from telling me to go die. Just remembering that made Clump cover his face and laugh out loud. Does that make sense to you, who would refuse to become a noble? Alfus gently stroked his beard. He understands the natural law of cause and effect. Clump replied, that's right. If there is no cause, there is no effect. However, not everyone understands this law and easily loses themselves. A new opportunity can come at any time, but the moment a person denies their roots, they will lose everything, and will not be able to decide what they believe is right. Does that remind you of yourself when you were young? Alfus remained silent, not replying immediately. After a long while, he said, the fact that they refuse to compromise means that others can agree with what they believe is right, but those people can also judge them. That's what I find dangerous. Clump, sitting on this side, clicked his tongue at that. Then he quietly asked, you still can't forgive yourself, right? You've done everything you could. You've taught so many talented people. Isn't it time you forgave yourself? The old man burst out laughing and said, if I were to forgive myself like that, it would be too arrogant, my friend. Alfus looked out the window and confided, the reason I teach children is to prevent someone like me from appearing again. With a sad look, the old man continued, if that child, as you said, is like me, there's no guarantee he won't step on the same terrifying path I did right. Clump on this side, hearing that, said, you were once a genius, Alfus, a once-in-a-century genius. He continued, "You, who were once considered the light of the Milch family, went down the wrong path once and nearly lost everything, but in the end, you came back. Of course, who knew you would become the headmaster of an academy in such a remote place?" Alfus then teased Clumph. "What then heaven must have helped you? A talentless brat became a third-rank official swordsman. I'm worried about the future of the kingdom of Tomia." Then they both laughed heartily together. The old man suddenly stood up abruptly, and then went to the window to look at his school. If there is no cause, there will be no effect. Clumph, while pouring more tea into the cup, said, "Is this fate? Who would have thought you had that boy? The child who was cast out 4 years ago has returned." The old man burst out laughing. "I don't believe in fate." Then he thought to himself, "However, Alfus thought of Chiron, a talent buried by class barriers, wandering for 4 years and now standing before me. Is this really fate?" Finally, the old man decisively announced, "I will accept Chiron." 3 years later in the spring, a carriage was driving into a small house deep in the forest. Chiron had already prepared himself from his hair to his clothes, and then called out loudly, "Mom, Dad!" Chiron Rian, now 17 years old. He smiled excitedly. "I'll be back soon." Chiron's mother hugged him tightly and praised him endlessly. "My lovely son, I'll miss you so much." He promised, "I'll write often. But does my hair look good? I've never had it like this before, so it feels strange." She replied, "Miss Raina said that short hair is popular among the nobility. Just act normal." Vincent on this side coughed a few times, a little embarrassed, and said, "Did you forget anything?" Chiron waved his hand. "Dad, I'm 17 years old. A kiss is a bit," he said decisively. "Hey, if you don't do it, let me," he shouted. And Vincent gently placed a kiss full of boundless love on his little son's forehead. Then he gently hugged him and expressed the feelings of a father. "Chiron, I'm proud of you." He also really enjoyed this warm feeling. Chiron then said, "But is it really okay?" The head of the family also said he would give me a house. "Why?" Vincent replied seriously. "Oh my God, your father is a hunter, right? A hunter's home is the mountains and fields." He was startled and thought to himself, "Really?" As he saw him off to the carriage, he said, "Even though I refused the allowances the Ogent family provides for you, they still insist on giving it to you." Seriously, Chiron said to himself, "This is a happy day in the village because I'm about to join a magic academy, but my father still hasn't told anyone. I'm sure the reason my father refused the offer to live in the city is because he won't become a reason to threaten me." Tamura was already waiting outside, respectfully saying, "Please get in the carriage. We will escort you to the academy." Chiron got into the carriage and stuck his head out the window, shouting, "I'll be back soon." And that's how my first day at the academy began. The carriage drove further and further away. Behind it was a couple seeing off their son, who was learning to grow up to realize his dream. Inside the carriage there were only Chiron and Tamura, making the atmosphere very awkward. When they arrived, he took the initiative to open the carriage door and called him young master. "We have arrived." Tamura helped Chiron step down. His face showed a clear expression of surprise and fascination. He continued, "At the Alfus School of Witchcraft and Wizardry." At this time it was very crowded with people coming and going, making the whole area lively. The school gate was tall and grand, looking very noble. Tamura said, "The cost of study materials will be paid through me, young master. You just need to study." Well, Chiron was extremely grateful. "Thank you, butler." He escorted him and said seriously, "I'm just doing my job." He on this side quietly bowed his head to express his most sincere feelings. "I feel like now is my chance to thank you. I was able to get here because you valued me. I will not forget your contribution." He smiled as he said the words he had always kept to himself. Suddenly, a sentence made Chiron jump. No matter how talented a commoner is, they are still just a commoner. They can never be better than a noble.